and start explaining that concept, Jonathan.
That's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30 years.
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a fantastic show for you. As always, want to start things off with a huge shout out there, though, for the super chat to Kami John, who put in $6.66, which I find particularly satisfying. Thank you for that, John. We always appreciate your support. Anyone else who wants to throw a super chat in, that does help us out. We are a nonprofit. You can also go to realprogressives.org. As I always am telling you, to find all of our fantastic content, realprogressives.org/donate if you want to become a monthly donor or give us a one-time donation. We are a nonprofit. We are trying to engage in education, activism, all that kind of stuff. So if you can give us some support, that would be very much appreciated. Want to remind everybody, please hit like and subscribe on this video. Go make sure you're subscribed to our other YouTube channel, Real Progressives, as well. And if you can leave a comment and try to share it widely to help us combat the algorithms, which are not all too friendly to independent progressive sources, as I'm sure you all are very well aware. So like, comment, subscribe, share widely, help us combat these algorithms. Realprogressives.org for all sorts of great content. Realprogressives.org/donate if you want to help us out, or you can do what Kami John did there and throw a little super chat in the live chat there. So we got a lot to talk about today, you guys. We're going to talk a little bit about the ongoing outrage over Chomsky's position on Ukraine. We're going to talk about the disdain for lesser evilism in France. I see a lot of parallels to the United States with what's going on with the election in France right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to show you guys the first iteration of Max Alvarez's new segment on breaking points, which he calls the art of class war. He's going to be doing a segment talking about workers and labor issues on breaking points. And his first one I thought was very fantastic. So we're going to bring you guys that. I couldn't help myself with this last week being 420. We're going to do a little segment on why Biden should keep his promise to deschedule marijuana and release nonviolent offenders who are in prison on marijuana charges. We're going to talk a little bit about how tax prep companies have rigged and monopolized the market, and how in other countries you do not have to jump through all these ridiculous hoops and pay a bunch of money to H&R Block in order to get your taxes done. We have a little bit to discuss about some activists are asking Biden to seize his support for the genocide going on in Yemen. Whole bunch of stuff to talk about here today, you guys. I do want to start with that Chomsky Ukraine story because the outrage over his comments are just really, they kind of blow my mind. And I think people who support Chomsky and seem to be disappointed by his position on Ukraine seem to both kind of like not actually be listening to everything he's saying. So what'll happen is a press outlet will take, handpick one quote of his, and then people get the wrong idea about his overall position. And I also just want to point out really quickly, you guys, that Noam Chomsky is widely considered to be one of the most influential intellectuals of his generation. And yet, do you ever see him paraded up on cable news? No, of course not. They only ever care what he has to say when he says we should vote for Joe Biden or something. Okay. That's the only time they will ever show you what Noam Chomsky has to say. When he's criticizing what we've done in the Middle East, when he's criticizing Israel, they won't bring you any of that, right? It's only when there's a chance to create outrage or controversy that they can profit off of, or when he is towing an establishment line that any mainstream outlets will care to show you what Noam Chomsky has to say. Okay, so I wanted to show you the quote that's been making the rounds here. This is in the Jerusalem Post. They titled this, "Noam Chomsky, Ukraine must make concessions to Russia's demands." And that's how this is all being framed. That's why I chose the Jerusalem Post here to show you guys, is because this is how this is all being framed. And I want to kind of debunk that a little bit. The quote in question, quote, "One option is to pursue the policy we are now following, to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. And yes, we can pursue that policy with the possibility of nuclear war, or we can face the reality that the only alternative is a diplomatic settlement, which will be ugly. It will give Putin and his narrow circle an escape hatch," Chomsky said. "We know the basic framework is neutralization of Ukraine, some kind of accommodation for the Donbas region with a high level of autonomy, maybe within some federal structure in Ukraine, and recognizing that, like it or not, Crimea is not on on the table, continued Chomsky. You may not like it. You may not like the fact that there's a hurricane coming tomorrow, but you can't stop it by saying, I don't like hurricanes or I don't recognize hurricanes. Listen, guys, that's just spot on. Okay. You can be like in your feels about him not being harsh enough on Putin or something, but that's just spot on. He's telling it like it is. And he went on, by the way, this was in an interview with The Intercept and Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept. And he went on at one point to say something about, like, he said there's only two ways that you can end a war, that we've ever ended a war in the history of mankind. There's two ways you can end a war. Either one side is basically completely eliminated, right? Like so destroyed that there is so little left that they lose power over the land that they previously had. Or you come to some sort of negotiated settlement. Those are the only two options. Now, we know in this situation that Ukraine is not capable of destroying Russia. So if you want to go that first route, there's only one country that's going to get destroyed. So we're either going to end this conflict with Ukraine being completely and utterly destroyed to the last Ukrainian, right? Or we can try to come to some sort of negotiated settlement. And I think people are taking Chomsky's acknowledgement of that reality as some sort of endorsement of Putin's actions. And I just really, again, want to encourage the audience to like two things can be true at the same time. Okay. So, there's a lot to dive into here. Like, from the United States perspective, it seems pretty obvious to me that what we have tried to do is escalate this situation and keep that war hot, because it's geopolitically expedient for us to essentially use Ukraine to engage in a proxy war with Russia. And it's also very convenient for the military contractors and weapons manufacturers who get to make massive contracts off of this stuff, increase their profits off of these conflicts, wars, invasions, tensions, etc. So from the United States position, we kind of have tried to play good Samaritan, as though we're just here to help out the poor Ukrainians. And yet what we've actually done is pump more weapons into the situation, right? And Chomsky also, this is a point where I disagree with him. Chomsky said that he actually supports that. He said he doesn't see a problem with support, giving weapons and support to Ukraine for them to defend themselves. Okay, that's a point where I disagree with Chomsky, because I think it's escalatory. And again, like, to the initial point that was in that quote, there are two options here. So and no one's gonna like the outcome, you guys. Like, when you have this kind of conflict and you come to a negotiated settlement, nobody's fucking happy. But the alternative is fight to the last Ukrainian and they all fucking die. So when that's the alternative, how is it like outlandish to acknowledge, hey, maybe we should try to come to a peace deal here. Maybe our efforts should be in diplomacy instead of in pumping more weapons into a situation. I do not understand the outrage here. I really don't, you guys. Well, I do in a sense, because the media has so programmed us just to viscerally respond to these things and do sort of the red baiting and, you know what I mean, the McCarthyism, all that kind of stuff. They've so convinced us that Russia is this unique evil that we must stop. And so many people do not know the actual context here. The NATO expansion, the 2014 coup, the civil war for nearly 8 years that's been going on in the eastern regions of Ukraine. People don't even know the basics of the background here, right? So they engage in the false dichotomy that I know my viewers probably get tired of hearing me talk about, but I see so much of it in how people view the world. We think of it as like it's fucking Marvel. There's a good guy and a bad guy, right? Zelensky's the good guy and Putin's the bad guy. That's not a reasonable or rational way to view the world. You're not going to get anywhere viewing the world like that. And by the way, Zelensky's not a good guy. This is another point I disagree with Chomsky on. He said, like, something about, I'm paraphrasing at this point, and I don't want to misquote him, but it was something about, like, I sympathize with Zelensky's position. Now, I can sort of sympathize with, like, having to deal with an invasion, but Zelenskyy is part of the government that was installed by the United States in 2014. He's like a right-wing corrupt maniac. So that one can sympathize with a position without going as far as saying he's a good guy. But in the United States, it's just Zelenskyy good, Putin bad. And that's how everybody views the conflict. And I think that's why when Chomsky acknowledges some of these realities, it breaks people's brains and they get really fucking upset. So as far as like what's actually up to date in Ukraine, it seems like the focus is back on the eastern regions. Russia has pumped more troops in, and Ukraine does not seem to be backing down. The negotiations don't seem to be really getting anywhere, quite frankly. So the longer this drags on, you guys, the worse it is for all parties involved, really. I mean, death all around, right? Russian troops are going to keep dying. Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian troops are going to keep dying. But who's it good for? It's good for NATO geopolitically because they get to fight a proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. It's good for NATO and the United States geopolitically, outside of all the resource stuff with Europe. And it's also very good for weapons manufacturers and military contractors. And I think all too often, if you just follow the money, you get a pretty good idea of what the actual incentives for our decision making are. So anyway, I'm really kind of fascinated by the extent of this outrage towards Chomsky, right? And you know, I wanted to make sure to kind of cover that. And I also I know I noted this at the start, but I want to note it again, you guys. You only ever hear what Chomsky has to say when there is a convenient reason for the mainstream press to bring it up. Noam Chomsky is never brought up on mainstream outlets. He's just never, you never see him interviewed on CNN or MSNBC, right? You never see him interviewed for like the New York Times or anything like that. It's The Intercept and it's Democracy Now! These are the outlets that will have Noam Chomsky on, not the mainstream. So it's just interesting to me. As soon as he says, you know, I think Trump's scary enough, you should vote for Biden, then everyone, oh, Chomsky says vote for Biden, right? But when he's criticizing the United States foreign policy or calling out the war crimes that Israel's committing, which we're going to get into today, then it's no, nobody needs to hear from this guy, right? Anyhow, the next story that I wanted to get into here, I'm really fascinated by some of the parallels between the United States political dynamic and France's political dynamic. Want to start here with a tweet from Good Politic Guy, regular guest on this show. He says, healthy democracy, and he shows a screenshot here of a poll. It says, reasons for voting for Emmanuel Macron. The winner by 91% to 9% is to block Le Pen from winning, not because he would make a good president. And that just, again, guys, like that's like the United States, right? We all remember all the jokes, Hillary and Trump, Biden and Trump. It's the lesser evilism. For those who've seen that South Park episode where they were going to get a new mascot, at the school, and they made the mistake of letting the kids pick the mascot. So it came down to two, giant douche and turd sandwich, right? So they had a debate between giant douche and turd sandwich, who's going to win to become our new school mascot. That was, you know, the running joke in 2016 is that South Park basically came up with the 2016 election, and it was true in 2022. 2020 as well. Nobody really truly supported the person that they were voting for. Most of what they were voting for was an anti-vote against the other opponent. It's the lesser evil dynamic. And I think this, you guys, I think it somewhat speaks to the short-term nature of elections, and I think this is an impossible problem to solve because there are problems on longer terms and problems on shorter terms, right? If you do longer terms and you get someone that's bad in there or someone becomes corrupted early on, then you're stuck with them for a longer period of time. That's not great. But when you do these shorter terms, then as soon as you're elected, you're kind of forced to just think about, how am I going to win again? And I think that allows parties to exploit that kind of lesser evil mentality and basically say, no, but it's the end of the world if this other person gets in. It's the end of the world, right? And we just keep thinking in those short-term ways. So we don't think like, how do we set ourselves up best for the next election cycle? Maybe it would be to put pressure on the Democrats from the outside. Maybe that would actually, you know, do some good if they got absolutely railroaded one of these election cycles. And it was very obvious that it was because they had betrayed young voters in the left. Maybe that would do some good, but we're we buy into that dichotomy again, the false dichotomy and the lesser evil mentality, and we never actually do it. So then we remain in this sort of it's like it maintains itself. It's a dynamic that's self-maintaining, right? So I thought that tweet was exactly spot on. Healthy democracy when 91% of people say, "Oh yeah, I'm voting for this person because I don't want that person in, not because I support this person." That's the last number of United States presidential elections, and it's quite a bit of our congressional elections too, you guys. I mean, it's like, look at the congressional approval rating is usually like below 20% or around 20%. It's laughably bad, When Congress's approval rating is high, it's like in the mid 20s. Okay. But yet, what's the reelection rate in Congress? It's like 90 something percent. If I have that right, maybe it's 88% or something. If someone wants to look that up and put it in the comment section, but it's something like 90%, right? So how do those two things square with each other? It's because we buy into the lesser evil nonsense. So we can't stand Congress. A lot of us can't stand our own representative, but we're so terrified of the other guy that we're willing to fall in line every 2 years, or in the Senate situation every 6 years, and vote for something that we may be tepid on or not like, because we're so terrified of the alternative. And that dynamic that is rooted in fear is not healthy at all for a society, you guys. If I need to say it, like, that's so obvious, right? So I'm going to humiliate myself here and try to read you guys an article about this. You can all laugh along with me as I try to pronounce French names and things like that. For those who are not regular viewers, I am absolutely terrible at pronouncing things, so we can have some fun here. This is in Newsweek. French protests follow student opposition to Le Pen and Macron runoff. It's by Brendan Cole. Demonstrations will take place across France on Saturday on the heels of university protests, which saw anger vented at the presidential election choice of incumbent Emmanuel Macron and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. Police have warned there might be incidents of demonstrations against the far right, which are planned in about 30 cities across the country. Anti-Macron protests will also gather in the French capital. At time of writing, some have already begun. The actions follow a week of protests expressing unhappiness at the results of the first round of the elections on April 10th, in which no left-wing candidate made the runoff. Le Pen, who heads the national rally, got 23.1% of the votes, close behind Macron's 27.85%, Reuters reported. But on Wednesday, students who do not like either candidate started to occupy the campus of Paris's Sorbonne University, which has been the scene of many French students' revolts over the years, including the May 1968 uprising. The students ended their occupation of the campus after 30 hours before police stormed the building, but not before law enforcement fired tear gas outside. There were also protests at the University of Paris 8 and the École Normale Supérieure in the capital, as well as the Nancy campus of Political Sciences Institute Sciences Po, where protesters blocked the main entrance with garbage cans. The Associated Press reported that the protesters included many who voted for far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who finished 1 percentage point behind Le Pen in the first-round presidential vote last Sunday, but did not make the runoff. Mélenchon's voters will be crucial in the second round to Macron, who earlier this week was only narrowly ahead of Le Pen in the polls. Voters on the left see Le Pen, who heads the National Rally Party, as a threat with her promises to cut immigration. Macron has faced criticism that he has drifted too far to the right. I just want to pause here, you guys, because there seems to be a lot of, I'm no expert on French politics, so please, grain of salt, but there seems to be a lot of parallels here in the sense that Le Pen is very much sort of a Trump-type candidate, and Macron is very much sort of a partisan establishment Democrat type candidate. Le Pen is sort of this populist right winger who is very anti-immigration and opposed to free trade. She's sort of a protectionist populist type, just like Trump. And Macron is one of these, I'm going to talk like I'm progressive, but I'm going to act like I'm a corporatist centrist, just like the Democratic Party, right? So it's a very interesting dynamic that seems to have presented itself both in France and the United States, and to some degree in the UK, where we had Jeremy Corbyn was kind of their Bernie Sanders, right? And you had, I mean, Boris Johnson isn't like Trump, but he's pretty fucking awful, isn't he? And obviously the modern Labour Party, since they have forced Corbyn out, is much more of a centrist conservative party, just like the Democrats, and they had been before that, obviously, as well. So it's just interesting how in some of these major countries you're seeing neoliberalism result in a very similar political dynamic. And I just wanted to take a moment to point that out. Carry on here. There is also unhappiness on the left at Macron by many who cite police brutality against yellow vest protesters and measures on what Macron calls Islamist separatism. Quote, we now have a second round with only 2 right-wing candidates who are the enemies of the workers and of the youth, and we can't accept that. Sciences Post student Gabriel Vernes told the AP. Meanwhile, Agnès Jacquemart, a philosophy student at the Sorbonne, told Reuters, neither Macron nor Le Pen. We're tired of always having to vote for the less bad of the two, and that's what explains this revolt. It's lesser evilism, and everywhere in the world, people are fucking sick of it. Many students have said they would rather not vote than back Macron simply as a means to stop Le Pen from winning power. This contrasts with the 2002 election runoff in which Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the far-right National Front, faced off against then incumbent Jacques Chirac. The latter had won with 82% of the vote. The prospect of not rallying behind the mainstream candidate in the runoff of April 24th is of concern to Macron's camp. However, the incumbent will be buoyed by the results of an Ipsos Sopra Steria poll on Friday, which showed Macron winning the runoff with 56% of the vote. So I just really see a lot of parallels there, you guys, where you end up, you never actually are voting for something that's even close to what you want. And I've heard this analogy. I have mixed feelings on it because I think it's like a fair analogy, but I also think it is often used to sort of dispel with the concerns of progressives. And I think it's often used to kind of tell progressives to get in line. So I don't love how it's often weaponized, but I think the bus stop analogy is somewhat accurate. When you're voting, it's like taking a bus. The bus is never dropping you at your front door, right? So you take the bus that gets you the shortest distance from your front door. So vote for the candidate that's the closest, right? That's the analogy, okay? My argument, though, is that in today's day and age, there's no bus that's taken me within like hundreds of miles of my destination. So it's the other aspect is you're not going to take a bus that then requires you to walk for a week, right? So like it might be a few miles closer than the other bus, but if it's still 600 miles away from my destination, like, you guys see what I mean? It's all within context, right? And I think what people are tired of is exactly that. We're being told, well, this bus gets you a little closer. And it's like, no, but look at the gaps that we're talking about and how close to the Republicans you are. Or in this case, Macron and Le Pen. So I am just very fascinated by this dynamic that seems to have presented itself in many countries around the world during the neoliberal era. And, I don't see any like end to it in sight. I think the only things that we can do are center our movement around labor, you guys. I think we can actually make some headway if we continue to push for unions and strikes and get some sort of mass strike movement going. A true general strike, however you define that, seems pretty impossible in the current environment. But if we can just start getting groups of industries and companies and people geographically to engage in labor organizing, we can start working in that direction. And I think that will be the catalyst for change. I also think protests like the French have showed us with the yellow vest movements, I think that can be very valuable, direct actions, all that kind of stuff, right? But I don't see a political end in sight here. Like, I don't see in 2024, I don't see a progressive winning the United States presidency. I don't see an end in sight here. I don't see Jeremy Corbyn getting elected in the UK anytime soon. Like, despite how overwhelmingly popular the platforms are among the voter base, the media has been so successful in indoctrinating people to support the establishment and to engage in lesser evilism and to fear the other party more than you support your preferred candidates or your preferred branch of the party or whatever. I think they've so successfully propagandized us that people just end up falling in line. And I don't necessarily see an end to that politically unless we see some major movements on the more direct side. And I am encouraged by what I've seen there. So interesting parallels there between France and the United States. And we'll follow that election as it proceeds. So I want to show you guys here Max Alvarez's first segment with breaking points. He's doing a new weekly segment, I believe. Might not be weekly. It's a new segment with breaking points. He's calling it the art of class war, which I absolutely love. And I thought this was a fantastic bit, so I'm showing you guys this whole segment. This is Max Alvarez's new segment, the art of class war.
I'm Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Real News Network and host of the podcast Working People. And I couldn't be more excited to be teaming up with the Breaking Points crew to bring you all the latest updates on workers' struggles in the labor movement and to provide what I hope will be information and analysis that you can use to take back power in your workplace and beyond. This is the art of class war. Today, I want to talk to you about one of the greatest weapons the ruling class has in its arsenal, a weapon it has always known how to effectively use to keep working people down: time. At the most fundamental level, working for a wage, working to survive, means trading your labor and your time to another for compensation. That is time out of your day, out of your week, out of your life that is specifically reserved for work, where the average person spends at least a third of their lives. That is also time that is surrendered to the control of someone else, someone or some entity or some algorithm that determines what your work schedule is, how much that schedule changes, and how much advance notice you get about said changes, what you do during that time on the clock, the pace at which you do it, the length of your workday, when your breaks and days off are, and even the age at which you get to retire, if you ever get to retire. Amazon workers are surveilled to Orwellian extents, getting docked for, quote, time off task, some resorting to pissing in bottles so as not to fall behind delivery quotas. Truck drivers, train conductors, and flight attendants pump their bodies full of caffeine or whatever works to keep them awake on long-haul trips. Gig companies tout the rates workers earn on the job while conveniently omitting uncompensated time spent driving between orders. Understaffed hospital workers have to serve more patients with less support, staying as late as needed to properly log every single bit of information about patients, tests, cross-department communications, and routine tasks in their internal computer systems. Teachers, with packed class loads, struggle to find time, often uncompensated time, for sufficient prep. Retail and service workers can hardly plan their lives outside of work or get other jobs when their shifts change sporadically week to week, while many are deliberately underscheduled as a cost-saving measure or a disciplinary measure, or both. Last year, many of the strikes and other labor actions we saw involved workers at jobs that, during the COVID-19 pandemic, experienced record demand, record profits, record increases in revenues or endowments from Kellogg's, Frito-Lay, Nabisco, and Smithfield Pork Processing to Heavens Hill Distillery, John Denaire Desserts, St. Vincent Hospital, John Deere, and even Columbia University. At many of these jobs, workers reported being pushed into forced overtime to meet the increased demand, getting less time with their families, less time to rest, less time to heal, while bosses, executives, and shareholders were practically swimming in pools of money like Scrooge McDuck. In so many ways, labor's struggle is the struggle for time. Along with our bodies, it is the most precious and finite resource we have to offer. This is why, as historians frequently point out, the fight over the workday is perhaps the most common denominator connecting the different strands and iterations of the labor movement. This is why we rightly celebrate things like the weekend and paid leave as worker-won victories. This is why we still remember the refrain, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, even though the merciless, insatiable drive of modern capitalism has made it increasingly impossible for working people today to realize that centuries-old dream. Workers know the value of their time. That is why so many continue to fight for it. And that is why this fight has brought and will keep bringing divided segments of the working class together. One particular example that has been unforgivably ignored or barely covered by corporate and right-wing media, but that has thankfully been featured on Breaking Points many times, along with outlets like The Real News, Labor Notes, and the Valley Labor Report, is the Warrior Met coal strike. As of April 1st, 1,100 striking union mine workers and their families in Alabama have been on strike for over a year, holding the line under great duress, great financial strain, violence from scabs on the picket line, and business-friendly courts stripping their federally protected rights to picket. Again, if we're talking about time, think about how long a year actually is. This time last year, all eyes were on the first Amazon union vote in Bessemer, Alabama. A coup had just taken place in Myanmar, and Joe Biden was 2 months into his presidential term. The Warrior Met coal strike is already one of the longest in the country's history, and is suspected to be the longest strike in Alabama's history. And every single day has been a struggle. To mark the 1-year anniversary of the day the Warrior Met strike began, the United Mine Workers of America held a rally earlier this month in Tannehill State Park. For The Real News, the brilliant journalist Kim Kelly, who has hands down covered this strike more consistently and with more compassion and dedication than anyone else in the country, went to the rally to talk to workers about their year of struggle and why they won't back down. Here's a bit of Kim's interview with Greg Pilkerton, a mine worker who has been injured by company goons on the picket line, who talks about his fight.
I have to really look around to see what's going on, because I'm a coal miner, and I'm not set up to be the Amazon worker or the Walmart worker. You know, it takes them people to do their job, and it takes me to do mine. So if it's not over this time next year and we do an interview, I'll still be standing here. Beer to be a little longer, but
I'm still here. And that's what's important.
thank you all. Thanks for everybody that's done everything that they've done. It means a ton. I can't not honor my dad's legacy and the UMWA's legacy and my family legacy and the rest of my co-workers' legacies. It's, there's too much has been given and it's been fought too hard for. So we ain't going nowhere.
This time last year, when the strike began, workers repeatedly stressed that time was one of the most central issues in their fight against the company. After the previous contract was forced on the union because the previous owner of the mine went bankrupt, workers reported not only drastic changes to their pay and benefits, but to their schedules. Along with the additional hours spent just getting to the job site, driving out to the mines in the middle of nowhere and descending deep into the earth, workers described being required to work 6 days a week with their 1 day off never really being predictable. Sometimes it was a Tuesday, sometimes it was a Friday. And for many, 7 days a week was the norm. They also described a draconian four-strike attendance policy, leading workers to get fired or risk termination for any excused or unexcused absence, including visiting a spouse in the hospital. As coal miners' wives also described to Kim Kelly at The Real News, many of them have gotten used to having, quote, absentee spouses since the new schedules changed. Unable to meaningfully live and plan their lives outside of their grueling work, miners felt deep in their bones how every day spent thousands of feet underground is a day lost as their children grow and their parents age above ground. What I have heard over and over again from Warrior Met coal workers is as heartbreaking as it is simple. Quote, "We just want to see our families," end quote. The UMWA motto, which has become something of a mantra for strikers, is 1 day longer, 1 day stronger. meaning however long the company holds out, workers keep saying that they just need to hold out one day more. This strike embodies one of labor's most enduring and defining struggles, the struggle to control our own time. The fight over the working day and who gets to control the majority of a worker's life has been perhaps the most consistent and common driver of the labor movement and has been a strong unifying force bringing people from different jobs, sectors, trades, races, genders, and all other walks of life together. As Philip Foner and David Roediger write in their book, Our Own Time, A History of American Labor in the Working Day, contrary to the varied fights by different trades and different types of workers for better wages and working conditions, quote, the reduction of working hours constituted the prime demand in the class conflicts that spawned America's first industrial strike, its first citywide trade union councils, its first labor party, its first general strikes, its first organizing, uniting skilled and unskilled workers, its first strike by females, and its first attempts at regional and national labor organization. Reduction of hours became an explosive demand partly because of its unique capacity to unify workers across the lines of craft, race, sex, skill, age, and ethnicity. End quote. So what is different now is these age-old struggles are still happening, but they are happening in a techno-dystopian 21st century in which the mechanisms for tracking, surveilling, and controlling our time are more sophisticated than ever. They are also happening in a hyper-mediated environment in which we have all been conditioned to have the long-term memories of goldfish. That's what makes us such loyal participants in a digital ecosystem where we become eager data producers for an attention-based economy that needs us clicking and staring at our screens as much as possible. But that bleeds over into other parts of our brains and our hearts too. It eats away at our capacity for long-term commitments. It makes it harder for us to sustain our attention and our solidarity and our compassion for struggles that take time, like the Warrior Met coal strike. In this way, the attention economy is a labor issue, because if we continue being the kind of people corporate captured technology makes of us, if we allow it to erode our capacity for commitment without putting up a fight, we will lose. Because difficult campaigns will require years-long battles to make an impact. We have to be in it for the long haul. Commitment, as writer Pete Davis would say in his book Dedicated, is the thing we most need if we're going to start fixing this broken world. And here's the thing. Workers fighting for the respect and dignity and treatment and compensation and safety that they deserve is part of that fixing. It's a big damn part that requires sustained commitments. Because once we start going Uma Thurman and we start wiggling that big toe, once working people start building power, and as Sarah Nelson says, once workers start taking hold of the power they already have, once we stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other, once we come together in the struggle to make life better for once, that power grows. From the shop floor to the State House, working people's power to shape the world grows when we are in the struggle together. If we want to be part of that change, if we want to be a part of the labor movement, and if we want to help grow the movement for working people to have more power in this world, then we have to stay committed to these struggles. And this is exactly what the bosses and the ruling class in general desperately want to prevent. This is why they use time as a weapon. This is why the go-to strategy for Warrior Met Coal and its Wall Street investors is to wait the strikers out, regardless of how much money they lose in the process. They have seen time and again how effective that strategy can be, especially in the 21st century, and not just in the realm of labor politics. And I'll just give one example. In August of 2019, Democrats around the country were on every major news network calling for then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to push through a Senate vote on H.R. 8, a bill that had passed the House with bipartisan support in February of that year, which would require universal background checks for all firearm sales in the country. Now, the increased pressure from Democrats at the time, which was itself a response to increased pressure from scared and pissed off constituents, came in the wake of two mass shootings that occurred within 1 day of each other. In the first, Patrick Wood Crusius, a white supremacist terrorist, went on a shooting spree at a Walmart supercenter in El Paso, Texas, killing 23 people and injuring dozens more. Then, the very next day, Connor Betts shot and killed 9 people and wounded 17 others in Dayton, Ohio. At that point in 2019, the U.S. Chamber of the Senate was in its August recess. In the days and weeks after the Dayton and El Paso shootings, congressional Democrats breathlessly called for McConnell to recall the chamber and put H.R. 8 to a vote. He didn't. Then another deadly shooting took place in the West Texas cities of Midland and Odessa on August 29th, and pressures continued to mount. McConnell said that he would only bring H.R. 8 to a vote if then President Trump supported it. He didn't. The bill became another rotting legislative corpse on McConnell's desk. At the time, Don Beyer, Democratic representative for Virginia's 8th congressional district, actually summed things up quite pointedly. Quote, Mitch McConnell isn't doing anything about it. That isn't because he doesn't know about the problem or how to solve it. We know precisely why Mitch McConnell isn't here. He is waiting for the outrage to die down, for the headlines to change, and people to turn the page and go on. It's what he always does, end quote. Now, I want to be very clear that this is not a segment about Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, nor is it about Democrats and the endless debate about gun control and mass shootings in America. I'm bringing up McConnell because he is probably the most recognizable practitioner of the ruling class serving weaponization of time. He can sit there and take the hits and just wait us out, and it just keeps working. But the point here is that this tactic is a staple for employers and shareholders looking to break strikes, wear down unionization efforts, and demoralize workers. And you can find other examples all over the place. Kellogg's tried to sweat out 1,400 striking workers using the looming holidays and the cold weather as an additional demoralizing agent. Tenet Healthcare, the company that owns St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, tried to starve out its striking nurses for almost a year. And Warrior Met Coal is doing the exact same thing to the striking miners. They are banking on us forgetting about them. They are banking on our attention waning and our outrage dissipating. Don't prove them right. Don't let them win. What I'm saying is we all have a role to play here, but it's going to take work. It's going to take fighting against the forces that turn time against us and that in turn lead us to turn away from each other. We can't just keep excitedly jumping from strike to unionization. Supporting all facets of this movement is essential. Sharing the news is important, but we also have to commit. We have to see them through. We have to be there when it counts, not just when it's trending online. I don't care if it's raising money or just bringing coffee to a picket line. Imagine you're a striking coal miner on the empty back roads outside Warrior Met Coal in Alabama. Every single sign that you are not alone in this, that other working people are with you, is enough to keep you going one day longer, one day stronger. No one has to do everything here, but everyone can do something, even if it's just continuing to demand justice for the railroad workers who are suffering under their own abusive working and scheduling conditions and who had their strike blocked by the company and the courts, as was covered before on Breaking Points. And even if it's just making sure that we never forget names like Evan Seyfried, Jennifer Bates, Daryl Richardson, Christian Smalls, Angelica Maldonado, Maricruz Mesa and Carmen Anguiano, Amanda and Jeff Frankel, Beto Sanchez and Nebretta Harden. Hayden and Braxton Wright, and so many more. This isn't just about us being excited that workers are rising up, asserting their humanity, and demanding what they deserve. This is about us helping one another climb out of the pit that we've been put into by those in power. The labor movement has to be in it to win, because that is damn sure what the other side is trying to do with much deeper pockets and control over powerful institutions that they can use at their disposal. If we are going to win, it is up to us to carry on labor's enduring fight and to take up each other's fights as our own. We have to fight for our time, and we have to fight against the way that time is being weaponized against us. And we have to do it now, because as is always the case for every single one of us, time is running out. The days that we are here are not just abstract units of time passing by. They are precious moments of being on this earth during the one life that we get. Use them well. Thank you for watching my debut segment with Breaking Points, and be sure to subscribe to my news outlet, The Real News Network, with links in the description. See you soon for the next edition of The Art of Class War. Solidarity forever.
Fantastic stuff from Max Alvarez there. I put links in the description box to his work if you guys want to follow him on Twitter or follow his work with The Real News. I put links to all of that in the description box. And I love you guys how he actually ties it back. Like I think like with a lot of political issues, and I'm guilty of this, I think we sort of talk about them in these abstract, sort of almost academic ways. And I like that he just ties everything back to like, this is our one fucking life. Like for us to spend all of our time, about a third of our time, right? And a third of our time asleep or something. So we're spending like half of our waking time at work. I mean, I think that is such a fundamentally crucial point. At the very base level, I think that is absolutely crucial. And I love how that's how he talks about this issue. How is this impacting our livelihood? And the one thing that we have is our health, and we have our health and we have time, right? And we have each other, but that only matters if we have the time to spend with each other. So I just love how he ties working class issues and labor issues into our lives and our livelihood and our satisfaction. And he points out time is all that you have. Don't let your employer rob you of it. I really, really, really love that, you guys. Just fantastic bit there from Max Alvarez. I encourage you all to follow his work. That is, that is why I am so adamant about covering labor issues on a weekly basis. And we'll have a labor update, as we always do, coming up here in just a little bit. So huge shout out to Max Alvarez. Encourage you all to follow his work. Great stuff there. Fantastic stuff. So again, I couldn't resist, you guys. I'm in the state of Washington, and I am very much a user of marijuana, so to say. I couldn't help on the 420 week going ahead and doing a couple of pot stories here. So obviously, one of the things that Joe Biden could do without any approval of Congress is deschedule marijuana and change the way that we deal with drugs in general. Again, if I had my way, we'd legalize everything, but that's at least decriminalize everything. And Portugal is the model for that. If you guys are not aware, Portugal decriminalized all drugs, and in a decade they had cut addiction in half. So if you are truly intending to cut into addiction problems, substance abuse problems, mental health problems in your society, it's pretty clear what the route is. It's not the war on drugs. That doesn't work. In fact, it backfires. It's counterproductive. Anyhow, this is about weed in particular. Joe Biden obviously making some promises on the campaign trail that he has reneged on. This in the New York Post. Ahead of 420, pot prisoners push Biden to honor campaign pledge to free them. This is by Stephen Nelson. On the eve of the 420 cannabis holiday, federal inmates again are wondering if and when President Biden will make good on his 2020 campaign pledge to free, quote, everyone locked up on marijuana charges. About 2,700 inmates are behind federal bars on pot-related charges, even though 18 states and D.C. now allow recreational use of the drug, and 2/3 of Americans support legalization. They include Pedro Moreno, 62 years old, who's serving a life sentence after pleading guilty to distributing weed imported from Mexico from 1986 to 1996. Quote, I will die in prison for marijuana unless I receive executive clemency, Moreno told the Post. All I can do is hope President Biden was sincere when he said he will free all the pot prisoners. Clemency advocates recently met with White House staff and believe Biden may eventually intervene, but that it may not happen anytime soon as other initiatives take priority, such as commuting the sentences of people released temporarily from prison due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Guys, this can all happen at once. What is this like? We have other priorities. Oh my word. Clemency, executive clemency is Biden signing a piece of paper. Someone has already found the 2,700 people in federal prison on marijuana charges right now. So what, you don't got the time, Joe, to sign a fucking piece of paper? Give me a break. Give me a break. We have other priorities. Well, you're not doing fuck all anywhere else either. You're not canceling student debt, which would again be a signature. You're not improving healthcare. You're not doing anything except escalate things in Ukraine. What the fuck are you doing, dude? We got other priorities. Give me a fucking break. It is not easy keeping hope alive when year after year peels off the calendar and I see my grandkids growing up while I wait for a second chance, Moreno said. I want to hug my daughter, Alejandra, and see her eyes light up with happiness. That's all I dream about. That's what keeps me going. Luke Scarmazzo, 41, has served 14 years of a 22-year sentence for running a medical marijuana operation in California and told the Post that he's also struggling to maintain hope. Quote, when President Biden made those statements on the campaign trail, my family and I were very hopeful that our nightmare was finally coming to an end, Scarmazzo said. We are now nearly 2 years into President Biden's term, and we're wondering when he will make good on his promise. Donald Fugit, 37, noted how the country has changed in the decade since he was arrested in 2013. Quote, another 420 and everybody is smoking and making money, but I'm still in a COVID-19 infested prison, said Fugit, a North Texas native who gets out in 2024 unless Biden reduces his sentence. Quote, I've accepted responsibility for my participation in a marijuana conspiracy. Everyone in my case is home except me. This was my first offense. Marijuana conspiracy. You guys, 2/3 of the country wants to legalize it. Take the most mundane product you can think of. Okay, how about milk? What if we called every grocery store selling milk? What if we said you're engaged in a milk conspiracy? You need to go to fucking prison. I mean, Jesus Christ. I engaged in a marijuana conspiracy. Just like the words being put together sounds so outrageous. And if it weren't so harmful to people, it would almost be comedic. But of course, it's ruining lives. We just talked about that Max Alvarez clip where he's talking about like time is all that you fucking have and health is all that you have. Oh, good. So let's throw people in prisons that are COVID-19 infested and like let them rot away, wasting their lives. It is beyond outrageous. I know I share this anecdote every time that I talk about weed, but I just think it's such a good one. Someone just made the rounds online a long time ago. When the pot shops look like an Apple store, a lot of people need to be let out of prison. And that's where we are now. That's what happened on 420, you guys. I go down a few blocks down the road and I walk into a store and they're doing sales for 420 and I go buy what I want and leave. And there are people sitting in prison for that right now. That's beyond outrageous. And let's also not ignore the race element here, you guys. I've made this point before too. Who is benefiting from each policy decision? So pre-legalization, who was suffering because of that policy and who was benefiting from it? The status quo was benefiting, right? Because there are a lot of industries that are threatened by marijuana. So the liquor industry, the beer industry, the wine industry, right? The pharmaceutical industry feels threatened by marijuana. Hemp makes great clothes and paper and all sorts of things, crafts, right? There's good food options there with hemp seeds and things like this. Okay, lots of big industries feel threatened by cannabis and by marijuana. So they're benefiting from the criminalization of the prohibition of marijuana. They get to benefit while who's being punished by that policy? Low-income people and the black community, right? And then once we legalize, who's benefiting from that legalization decision? It's multimillionaires who can afford to start a grow op or open a pot shop. Largely white, right? Upper class. So who's benefiting? It's the same fucking people that were benefiting from the initial policy get to benefit from the legalization, and who is left to be punished by it or not benefit from it? Those who are still rotting away in prison, who are disproportionately black and largely low income. So just like notice who these policy decisions are designed to serve. When we legalized or decriminalized, what we should have done is paired that with the release of nonviolent offenders and reparations for their time served. Those two things should have gone together, and expunging their records, obviously. All of that should have been part of the initial legalization push. So now we find ourselves in a situation where most Americans live in a state where it is legal, at least medical. Vast majority of Americans live in a state where at least medical is legal. And we still have 2,700 people in federal prisons on marijuana charges, wasting their lives away for something that is now totally normal behavior, legal behavior. That is an atrocity. That is a disgrace, right? Our justice system does not actually come anywhere close to providing justice, but that's a pretty egregious injustice. And obviously, 420 provides the opportunity to highlight that. I think Biden should follow through on his promise here, but I am not naive enough to expect him to. Let's hope there's some progress on this stuff. Let's hope that some of these people are let out on clemency, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I want to talk here a little bit about how tax prep companies have rigged the system in their favor. For those that don't know, in a lot of other countries, like the way that you do your taxes is that the government does your taxes and then they send them to you for you to review and approve. And then that's it. Your taxes are done. In this country, we don't do that, even though it would be very easy, much easier, much more simple than our current system. The reason we don't do it is because the H&R Blocks of the world, and what is it called, Intuit or whatever it's called, all these major tax prep companies have bought off our politicians so that they can keep raking in billions to do the processing that could be done for free. So this in The Lever. It's by David Sirota. When you're mad about tax paperwork, here's who to blame. Ronald Reagan touted a simplification plan that other countries adopted, but that's now blocked in America by his own party and the tax preparation cartel. If, like me, you were annoyed about all the hours and money you just spent filing your taxes, then you should be extra pissed off about the demise of Democrats' Build Back Better bill. The legislation would have started the process of making it easier for millions of Americans to do their taxes and save the country billions of dollars. Today's Republican lawmakers oppose the idea, even though it was boosted by former President Ronald Reagan and has now been implemented in other countries around the world. At issue is the cat and mouse game millions of us have to play every year, the one where we spend hour after maddening hour trying to figure out what we owe in taxes and then hope our calculation matches what the IRS already knows is due. The process is one of the many ways America overburdens its residents in ways other countries don't. This annual ritual of red tape is such a defining feature of the American experience. It was a storyline on the original version of The Wonder Years. It remains such a tedious tax on our free time that it's become a joke. Literally. I love that line, the little pun. It's become a tax on our free time. David is such a brilliant fucking writer. When I'm spending late nights away from my kids, buried in end-of-year spreadsheets, receipts, and tax forms, I feel a deep sense of rage, knowing it doesn't have to be this way. And I know that because it isn't this way in many advanced industrialized countries. That's right, Sweden, Denmark, and more than 30 other countries offer many residents so-called return-free filing, whereby the government does the tax preparation itself. Though the systems vary, the basic process is this. Tax authorities use employers' filings to calculate levies that are owed and send taxpayers their forms already filled out, and let them decide whether to sign and pay or do the calculations on their own. Reagan loved this idea so much he gave a national address in 1985 expounding on its virtues. Quote, "We envision a system where more than half of us would not even have to fill out a return. We call it the return-free system, and it would be totally voluntary," he said. "If you decide to participate, you would automatically receive your refund or a letter explaining any additional tax you owe. Should you disagree with this figure, you would be free to fill out your own taxes using the regular form. We believe most Americans would go from the long form or the short form to no form. The IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service has said that this system would free tens of millions of taxpayers from the requirement to prepare forms. In a country where the average tax filer spends 11 hours a year on tax paperwork, experts estimate that each year this kind of system would collectively save Americans somewhere between 155 million and 255 million hours that we are currently forced to devote to bullshit paperwork that the IRS and state departments could easily do on their own. It could also collectively save tax filers somewhere between $2 billion and $5 billion a year that is otherwise spent on tax software and tax preparation services. And yet, even though California implemented a pilot return-free program that proved wildly popular, those billions of dollars of potential savings are the reason return-free filing hasn't already happened across America. Those potential savings are the huge profits that the tax preparation industry reaps, and that industry doesn't want to give up that pile of cash. So it has used campaign contributions and a sophisticated lobbying operation to block the IRS from implementing return-free filing. In securities filings, the tax preparation cartel admits that it has a financial interest in the government continuing to make it all but impossible to fill out your taxes on your own. Quote, federal and state governments have considered various proposals through which the respective governmental taxing authority would use taxpayer information provided by employers, financial institutions, and other payers, to pre-populate, prepare, and calculate tax returns and distribute them to taxpayers, wrote the tax preparation company H&R Block last year. The adoption or expansion of any measures that significantly simplify tax return preparation or otherwise reduce the need for third-party tax return preparation services or financial products could reduce demand for our services and products and could have a material adverse effect on our business. That's the bottom line, right? Likewise, Intuit, a financial software company, told shareholders that, quote, government-funded services that curtail or eliminate the role of taxpayers in preparing their own taxes could potentially have material and adverse revenue implications. I just think this story is such a great sort of example of how our political process actually functions. There is little to no care what is best for the community, what is best for the constituents, what the constituents want, etc., when there's enough money to buck that. And so in this case, we have an entire industry that does nothing but waste Americans' time and cause us stress. Nothing but it, right? The IRS already knows how much you owe, or else they couldn't check your taxes up against their figures. They would have no figures to check it up against. So they've already done the math. Why aren't we just getting their math and then getting, we have the opportunity to go over it? Why ain't that the situation? I mean, it's just so simple and so obvious why that's not the case. It's because Intuit and H&R Block and all these other tax preparation companies would lose their income, would not have any reason to exist. So once again, we have an unnecessary middleman scraping billions of dollars out of an industry to do nothing but waste all of our fucking time and cause us stress. And by the way, a lot of people end up going to jail over like miscalculating their taxes or paying huge fees, these kinds of things. And the IRS never goes after the rich because the rich can afford good tax attorneys. So what they do is they go after the poor people who can't afford good tax attorneys, right? So this system, again, who is it benefiting and who is it punishing? And why do we have the system designed as it's designed? It's for the profits, for the wealthy. It's for the executives and shareholders at H&R Block. They get to take onus over, take a priority over everybody else. All of us, millions of people, they get to take priority because of corruption, because of lobbying, because of special interest groups, right? That run the fucking country. So, and actually, on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys a clip here. This is Mo Brooks. He's a congressman in Alabama, and he's running for the Senate in Alabama, actually. This is him admitting that corruption is very prevalent in terms of who gets to hold committee seats and powerful seats in Congress and how direct the quid pro quo is. This is quite an admission from Mo Brooks. We'll watch this clip and then come back and discuss.
Y'all are very much concerned about why our Congress is so unresponsive to the regular needs of American citizens. Why some of these policies that come out are so bizarre, so unfair, so skewered against regular Jane and Joe citizens. The reason is simple. Special interest groups run Washington. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean literally. Now, here is how it happens. In the House of Representatives, I'll use that as an example because that's where I work. If you want to be chairman of a major committee, you have to purchase it. And the purchase price for a major committee, say like Ways and Means, minimum bid is $1 million. Now, I'm talking literally here. I'm not talking metaphorically, okay? We have committees broken down by A group, B group, and C group. C are the cheapest, B are the most expensive, are middling, A is the most expensive. It's the most expensive because those are the committees that the special interest groups care the most about. So where does a congressman come up with $1 million to be chairman of one of these A committees? You can't get it from Joe and Jane Citizen because Joe and Jane Citizen back home, they're not going to be contributing that kind of money. They don't have it. They need that money for their own families, okay? So let me finish. And so you have to get it from the special interest groups. And with the special interest groups, there is a quid pro quo.
And with the special interest groups, there is a quid pro quo. What's probably most hilarious about that is, I might be misinterpreting this, but it's almost like when she went to interject again and he was like, let me finish. The look on his face to me was almost like, oh, I fucked up. Like, oh, I just admitted that all of this is just direct corruption. Like, whoops. And then he goes on to like make it even worse. Then he goes on to say, by the way, yeah, that money that we're taking in, we're obviously doing favors for that money. There's a quid pro quo. You don't think we just get that money, right? Oh. How do you become a member of Congress, by the way, if you're that politically inept? Like, who doesn't know not to say that part out loud? There are 435 members in the House and 100 senators. Over 500 people know, like, you leave that part quiet. You don't tell people, like, yeah, I do favors for the big donors. Like, incredible admission from Mo Brooks, and it ties nicely in with that previous story there about tax prep companies and how they end up purchasing their billions of dollars in profits via corruption and lobbying. And it also, he mentioned the Ways and Means Committee, right? And that's what's the guy's name? Jesus, I can picture his face. It's on the tip of my tongue. He's Massachusetts. Alex Morse ran against him. Anyway, Democrat, corrupt right-wing Democrat. Ways and Means Committee has a lot of authority, you guys. It's one of the most powerful committees in Congress. Richie Neal, right? Is that right? Richie Neal? Is that anyway? Someone please correct me in the chat. Who's the Massachusetts Ways and Means Committee chair? Anyway, those kinds of committees have a great deal of say over not just what passes, but what even comes up to a vote. So when what we're being told is that costs $1 million and you're not going to get that from your constituents, you're going to get that from special interest groups. What he's saying is that these committees have been thoroughly and completely and literally bought off by the special interest groups who have, a vested interest in buying off that committee. So the Ways and Means Committee, for example, if we wanted to bring Medicare for All up for a vote, the Ways and Means Committee is one of the committees that has to go through, right? A lot of things that have to do with spending at all have to go through the Ways and Means Committee. A lot of things that have to do with healthcare have to go through the Ways and Means Committee. So I think it is Neal, right? Is it Richie Neal? Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. Has a great deal of power there. And what we just learned from Mo Brooks is that he bought that seat, right? So anyway, just quite a revealing clip there from Mo Brooks, and that ties in there with the tax prep companies. And I have another story here about taxes that I want to bring you guys. It's about how the wealthy manage to dodge taxes so effectively. This in ProPublica, America's highest earners and their taxes revealed. Secret IRS files reveal the top U.S. income earners and how their tax rates vary more than their incomes. Tech titans, hedge fund managers, and heirs dominate the list, while the likes of Taylor Swift and LeBron James didn't even make the top 400. Which people and professions rake in the most income year after year? Which are most adept at shielding their money from the tax man? And what does this tell you about America? The top earners, of course, are often fodder for lists, but those are usually based on estimates or even speculation. A trove of IRS data obtained by ProPublica has the definitive answers, revealing the incomes and tax rates of the 400 Americans with the highest incomes from 2013 to 2018. It took an average of $110 million per year in income to crack that list. Guys, that's income per year, not net worth. 110 million in income to crack that list, with plenty of names you would expect and some that may surprise you. We'll also show how much the 400 paid in federal income taxes. ProPublica is naming the 15th highest income earners. 15 highest income earners, along with an assortment that represent income patterns that we've identified. In theory, our tax system is designed to tax the rich at higher rates than everyone else. That's not the way it works at the loftiest incomes. The data reveals a system where the very highest earners, on average, pay far lower tax rates than the merely affluent do. And even among the top 400, some groups have it better than others. Tech billionaires pay rates well below even other business owners. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on the details there, you guys, but ProPublica did a great job going into those details if you're interested in checking them out. Really, the point here is we think we have this progressive tax system, and by that I mean that the wealthier you are, the higher portion you pay. And it seems that there's almost sort of a plateau. Like, the wealthier you are, coming through the poorest groups, as you get into the middle class and the upper middle class, the professional managerial class, that's where it peaks. Right? It's like the doctors and lawyers and things who might have $1 million or $2 million, but aren't the multi-billionaires who really run everything and have all this financial leverage. Those people are paying the highest tax rates. Then as you get into the uber wealthy, the billionaires and multi-billionaires, those with over 100 million in income per year, that's where you see a lower and lower tax rate being paid per year. It's also fascinating to me how there are some differences between industries, right? So like a lot of people in tech seem to pay a lot less in taxes than people in other industries end up having to pay. So it seems like there's actually some like discrepancies based upon how you made your billions and continue to make your billions. But the overall point is we actually have a very regressive tax system in this country. To the point that once you get past that sort of upper middle class, you actually see it going in the opposite direction, where the wealthier you are, the less taxes you likely pay as a portion of your income or of your net worth. So, and another thing, you guys, like, there's a lot of tricks to dodge taxes, not just built straight into our fucking law. I mean, we covered how some of the sanctions directed at Russian oligarchs were missing or were going to be, impotent. And the reason is because Wall Street is so opaque. Our financial system has been made so opaque intentionally that it's almost impossible to actually enforce some of those sanctions against Russian oligarchs. Well, obviously the same is true about trying to enforce taxes against our billionaires, right? They benefit from that opaque system that sort of legalizes, condones, and supports corruption and quid pro quo. So it's just another indication of how power actually works in this country and who gets to get away with what. And, for multi-billionaires to not even be paying the top marginal tax rate on a lot of their income. I mean, it's pretty incredible, you guys. It's pretty incredible. And obviously we need to tax them to cripple their power and take away their ability to control society to the extent that they can currently. I want to be very clear when we talk about taxes, and I know most of my audience knows this. Federal level taxes fund nothing. The spending must come first by definition. If you don't understand that, I urge you to look into modern monetary theory, and we have a whole lot of educational content on realprogressives.org pertaining to modern monetary theory. I also would encourage you to read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, which is an excellent primer into the topic. We learn from MMT that taxes do not fund federal spending. issuer of a fiat currency must spend before they tax. By definition, that is the order that it must go in. So when we're talking about taxing the wealthy, we're talking about doing so because they have a disproportional amount of power in our society, and we don't think they should. We should tax away their control, sort of a thing, right? The inequity in our society is outrageous, and I think directly taxing billionaires is one way to try to curtail some of that. So, but a couple of very interesting stories there that reveal the extent of the corruption and the extent of power that billionaires have in our society. Really wonderful stuff there from both The Lever and from ProPublica. I want to talk about Julian Assange, you guys. This is a story that, every time I cover it, I feel like I end up saying, like, I should cover it more. And I wish that in even independent outlets, I wish that this was covered more because it is such a critically important story. This is in The Guardian. UK court approves extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. Home Secretary to decide whether WikiLeaks founder will be extradited to U.S. on espionage charges. A court has formally approved the extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S. on espionage charges in what will ultimately be a decision for the UK Home Secretary, Prita Patel. The WikiLeaks co-founder, who has the right of appeal, appeared by video link during the Westminster Magistrates Court hearing, which one of his barristers described as a brief but significant moment in the case. Mark Summers for Assange told the chief magistrate that he had no option but to send the case to the Home Secretary. It was not open at this point for Assange's team to raise fresh evidence, but there had been fresh developments, he added. Summers said serious submissions would be made to the Home Secretary regarding sentencing and other matters. The brief hearing was taking place after the Supreme Court last month refused Assange's appeal against his extradition. He had sought to challenge a judgment by the High Court in December that ruled he could be extradited after assurances from the U.S. authorities with regard to his prison conditions there. An extradition order was issued by the chief magistrate, Paul Goldspring, during the 7-minute hearing. Goldspring told Assange, quote, "In layman's terms, I am duty-bound to send your case to the Secretary of State for a decision. As well as being able to make submissions to Patel, Assange's lawyers can also access other routes to fight this extradition. This could include mounting a challenge on other issues of law raised at first instance on which he lost and have not been subject to appeal." Assange, wearing a jacket and tie, appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison, where he was married last month to his partner Stella Morris, and spoke only to confirm his name and date of birth. Morris was in the public gallery at Westminster Magistrates Court, where a large crowd of supporters gathered outside, including the former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn said he hoped the Home Secretary would recognize her huge responsibility to stand up for free speech, journalism, and democracy and release Assange. Quote, "He has done no more than tell the world about military planning, military policies, and the horror of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I think he deserves to be thanked," he told reporters. There is something quite ironic about the timing here in the sense that the United States, Joe Biden is calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal and saying that what he's doing in Ukraine is a genocide. I think the latter is quite a questionable claim. I don't think it's questionable to call Putin a war criminal. Of course he's a war criminal, engaging in scatter bombs scatter munitions against civilians. Of course he's a war criminal, but for us to be making those claims as the country who's committed more war crimes in the last century than all others combined and doubled is beyond hypocritical. It's rank hypocrisy. For us to then continue these claims against Vladimir Putin and Russia while we are trying to extradite Julian Assange for revealing crimes against humanity is all the more hypocritical. This is why the United States just never has any ground to stand on when it comes to accusations being thrown around about the conduct of other countries and other leaders. And I think it's quite sort of terrifying how quickly the mood, the attitude, the tone that is used by Americans to speak about whistleblowers and journalists who reveal these kinds of things changed. I think, Daniel Ellsberg was roundly treated like a hero, right? Bernstein and Woodward roundly treated like heroes. And yet, how was Chelsea Manning treated, right? How is Julian Assange treated? How was Edward Snowden treated? So there seems to have been, reality winner. We could go on and on. There seems to have been quite a pivot in how the American public and the American media treat whistleblowers and journalists who reveal the state's crimes. And I think that is quite concerning and troubling. As many problems as there have been with the media for all of fucking time, at least during the Pentagon Papers leak, there was like an acknowledgement from major publications that their very profession, the integrity of their profession, was at stake when it came to, are we going to allow Nixon to, or Reagan, Nixon, both of them did this, to squash stories. So there was, I mean, the famous, the Washington Post coming out and publishing against Nixon despite his threat to arrest them. There used to be an acknowledgement, even in mainstream circles, that their very profession was at stake when it came to protecting whistleblowers, sources, and journalists. And yet Julian Assange, and I'll make the point again, you guys, he's not even a whistleblower. All that he did was publish information. If what Julian Assange did is illegal, then like the vast majority of journalists need to be fucking arrested. The very integrity of the profession is at stake. And meanwhile, we like to pride ourselves on our quote unquote free press. Look at how the United States press talks about the Russian press. Look at how we talk about Russian propaganda. While we condemn Julian Assange, while we support the extradition attempt of a journalist, it totally betrays the squawking about free press that you hear in United States and Western outlets all over the world. I do want to shout out Jeremy Corbyn, you guys, because even in the United States, like, I don't think I've ever seen, I really mean this, I don't think I've ever seen Bernie Sanders or AOC or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or Pramila Jayapal or Ro Khanna, any of them, Mondaire Jones, Cori Bush, Marie Newman. I don't think I've ever seen any of these people stand up for Julian Assange. Please correct me if I'm wrong, you guys. Maybe they have spoken to this issue. But the overall point is, Corbyn shows up at his hearing, at the public viewing of his hearing, in support of Julian Assange. What have we seen from progressives in the United States? I have not seen any sort of support, certainly not amounting to that level. And that's a shame. That is a real shame. I wish that there was more support for Julian Assange in the media. I wish there was more support for Julian Assange. And I mean, even independent, you guys, and I mean me, I'm going to make a point to cover this shit more. I think every independent source should. And I wish that the corporate press would also cover this, because they're, you know, they may just be so accepting of the demise of their profession, so willing to engage in journalistic malpractice that they don't care anymore. That may well just be the case. Or they may have so drank the Kool-Aid on the absurd culture that sort of prevails within the media elite in the United States, that they don't see it that way. But in either case, it's terribly problematic the way that this Assange situation has been handled and covered, and the narratives surrounding Assange, the consequences for the profession of journalism, the consequences for the capacity of whistleblowers to hold the powerful to any sort of account is huge. It can't be overstated. It's you know, gigantic. It's gargantuan. And I wish that this story was getting more coverage. I hope that his lawyers are able to make a sound argument pertaining to those initial claims that they have never had the right to appeal. I hope that there is some way that they can get him out of this extradition. But this is really terrible news, you guys. Just flat out terrible news. Prita Patel is not someone that you can trust to make the right call here. Again, I'm no expert on British politics, but Prita Patel is a conservative war hawk. There's very little reason to believe that Prita Patel is going to support Julian Assange or free press, or in any way, shape, or form stand on the side of transparency for the powerful here. So this is horrifying news. It's not that it was unexpected, but it's very bad news. So we'll keep up on the Julian Assange story. I encourage you all to keep that one front and center, because it has a lot of implications and potential consequences for the journalism profession going forward. We have a Common Dreams piece here talking about Yemen. or really more specifically, the demands of certain organizers here in the United States. This is by Jessica Corbett. Coalition demands end to U.S. military support for Saudi-led war on Yemen. Quote, Congress must help prevent backsliding by Saudi Arabia, said one activist, by passing the Yemen War Powers Resolution and blocking U.S. military support for any renewed hostilities. More than 6 advocacy groups on Wednesday pressured Congress to cut off U.S. military support for the Saudi-led war and blockade on Yemen, highlighting that it has helped cause the deaths of nearly 500,000 people and pushed millions more to the edge of starvation. The group's letter to Congress, led by Churches for Middle East Peace, Demand Progress, Friends Committee on National Legislation, Move On, Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, comes in the midst of a 2-month truce. The signatories are calling on lawmakers to co-sponsor a forthcoming War Powers resolution from Reps Pramila Jayapal and Peter DeFazio, declaring that Congress must reassert its Article 1 war powers, terminate U.S. involvement in Saudi Arabia's war and blockade, and do everything it can to support the Yemen truce. Hassan El-Tayyab, legislative director for Middle East policy at FCNL, said in a statement Wednesday that the recent announced nationwide truce between Yemen's warring parties offers hope that an end to the 7-year conflict might finally be possible. Quote, Congress must help prevent backsliding by Saudi Arabia, which has driven so much of the violence through indiscriminate airstrikes and crippling blockade by passing the Yemen War Powers Resolution and blocking U.S. military support for any renewed hostilities, he added. Congressional pressure is critical right now to keep the warring parties at the bargaining table and off the battlefield. Yemen, again, you guys, presents a number of hypocrisies here in terms of the narratives surrounding Ukraine. And one of those is the very obvious brazen one that we're going to condemn Putin for his war crimes while we support the war crimes of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We are part of the coalition that has armed and funded this genocide in Yemen. We support the blockade that has been internationally condemned. At this point, 377,000 Yemeni civilians are estimated to have died. 50,000 of them are children. And yet we have the gall to sit here and condemn Vladimir Putin, who, again, you guys, two things can be true. I condemn Putin's invasion. I condemn Putin's war crimes. I unequivocally condemn all of it. I also unequivocally condemn the United States' support for the Saudi and UAE genocide in Yemen. The other hypocrisy that I think is worth noting here, I've seen a lot of commentary about, Americans being it being patriotic to accept higher gas prices because you're not paying for Russian oil. Instead, you're paying for oil from moral sources. I mean, first of all, you guys, very little Russian oil actually came to the United States. A lot of it goes to Europe and other places around the world. Very little to the United States. And also the barrel price for oil has gone down while the prices have stayed stagnant. So let's rid of the notion that there are natural market factors involved here. What this is price gouging by Exxon and Chevron and all these oil giants. That's all that this is. So let's clarify that part of this. But insofar as anyone might buy into the narratives that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is affecting prices at the pump here in the United States, do you think that it is moral to purchase your gas from Saudi Arabia? Guys, it's they're ISIS that made it as a country. They are a right-wing theocratic regime that pushes Wahhabism. We're going to treat them like they're a moral source for resources. They're engaging in a genocide of their neighbor right now over religion and territory and power. I mean, we're going to treat them like some sort of good actor, like this is a moral source for oil. I mean, it's insane. It is so insane how easily Americans are convinced of these superficial, vacuous narratives that the press, instills upon them. And I shout out Common Dreams here for highlighting this push to end our support for the genocide and the blockade in Yemen. And I wish that other press outlets would cover this again. I think it was Alan McLeod with Mint Press News that in the course of a series of weeks, he found that 6 or 7 of the mainstream sources in the United States had written 2,700 or something pieces about Ukraine, and in that time they had written a combined 3 pieces about Yemen, Syria, and Somalia combined. it's just another example of the kinds of hypocrisies that you see amongst the Western media elite and the narratives that we see coming from our State Department and our media, certainly the mainstream, the most viewed sources. A huge shout out to Levi there for the super chat. I want to remind everybody we are a nonprofit. If you can afford to throw us a few bucks in the super chat, you can do that in the live chat there. We really appreciate it. You can also go to realprogressives.org/donate to help us out, realprogressives.org for all of our fantastic content. Just a quick plug and reminder, as you all, I'm sure, are very sick of hearing from me, but we do need and appreciate the support if you are able to give it. So we will move on here to a piece about surveillance. And this is just terrifying in a number of different respects. This is in The Intercept. It's by Sam Biddle and Jack Polson. American phone tracking firm demoed surveillance powers by spying on CIA and NSA. So it's kind of interesting how they proved that their technology here worked, but it's terrifying for the sort of broader implications. Anomaly 6, a secretive government contractor, claims to monitor the movements of billions of phones around the world and unmask spies with the press of a button. In the months leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, two obscure American startups met to discuss a potential surveillance partnership that would merge the ability to track the movements of billions of people via their phones with a constant stream of data purchased directly from Twitter. According to Brennan Clark of Anomaly 6, or A6, the combination of its cell phone location tracking technology with the social media surveillance provided by Signal Labs would permit the U.S. government to effortlessly spy on Russian forces as they amassed along the Ukrainian border, or similarly track Chinese nuclear submarines. To prove that the technology worked, Clark pointed A6's powers inward, spying on the NSA and CIA using their own cell phones against them. Virginia-based Anomaly 6 was founded in 2018 by two ex-military intelligence officers and maintains a public presence that is scant to the point of mysterious. Its website disclosing nothing about what the firm actually does. But there's a good chance that A6 knows an immense amount about you. The company is one of many that purchases vast reams of location data, tracking hundreds of millions of people around the world by exploiting a poorly understood fact. Countless common smartphone apps are constantly harvesting your location and relaying it to advertisers, typically without your knowledge or informed consent, relying on disclosures buried in the legalese of the sprawling terms of service that the companies involved count on you never reading. Once your location is beamed to an advertiser, there is currently no law in the United States prohibiting the further sale and resale of that information to firms like Anomaly 6, which are free to sell it to their private sector and governmental clientele. For anyone interested in tracking the daily lives of others, the digital advertising industry is taking care of the grunt work day in and day out. All a third party need do is buy access. And I hope you guys can see why this is obviously a terrifying development. I would encourage everybody to turn off the location tracking on your phone if you're not like using maps. I mean, this is all terrifying. It is a little bit, this is kind of a side note, but it is a little bit hilarious to me how like a lot of those right-wing conspiracies about the vaccine centered around Bill Gates supposedly implementing implanting a microchip in people, right? You guys remember this? And it's actually, it's not just about vaccines. That's like a common conspiracy, is that the left wants to like chip everybody and track everybody and all this stuff. And yet it's like, but then you have these neocon right-wingers literally doing it right now, with your cell phone. So who needs to put a chip in anybody when we all willfully download these apps and track our fucking selves with the device that we put in our pocket? The iPhone is a better piece of surveillance technology than any fucking supervillain could ever dream up. So, this all is just a terrifying direction that we're heading in. It's always worth noticing who gets to control these kinds of technology and these pieces of information, and who has control over the legal sort of structure about all of that, like what is and is not legal and what is and is not allowed. it's always worth noting who has control over these things. And it is usually groups who work with powerful governments who engage in heinous acts around the world, war crimes around the world. I'm blanking on the firm now, but there's an Israeli firm that does facial recognition, and they sell their technology to military and police and intelligence and all this, right? So usually this kind of terrifying technology that comes straight out of like 1984 is controlled by those who are the most nefarious actors in our society. And I think that's part of what makes it so incredibly problematic. So Anomaly 6, they're yet another terrifying firm. The direction that we're heading with surveillance and technology is deeply, deeply concerning, as if cops and intelligence officers need another thing to poke their way into all of our lives. That is deeply concerning on a number of different levels, and we'll track that story going forward. Good on The Intercept for covering it. So at this point, guys, I want to do our weekly labor update as usual. The backbone of the coverage here is More Perfect Union. They are at More Perfect US on Twitter. I encourage you all to follow their work. They're also More Perfect Union on YouTube. Go subscribe to their channel. We're going to show you a few clips they did here. The first one is about how Starbucks has responded to the wave of unionizations. There's a legal battle between Starbucks and the federal government. So we're going to watch this clip, come back, and discuss.
Story in America right now isn't getting the attention it deserves. Starbucks, America's biggest coffee chain, is engaged in illegal activities on a scale that has never been witnessed in recent history. We've searched through previously unreported documents, uncovered new evidence, and found information that should establish the basis for a new major lawsuit against Starbucks by the Biden administration. In the last few months, there have been at least 63 different allegations made by employees of Starbucks, which contend the company has engaged in illegal activity against them. These unfair labor practice charges, which have been filed with the National Labor Relations Board, span across the entire country, from Buffalo to Seattle and everywhere in between. Phoenix, Memphis, Austin, Denver, Peoria, Knoxville, Kansas City, Jacksonville, Santa Cruz, and many more. The pace and velocity of these charges against Starbucks is increasing. More than half of the total NLRB filings on Starbucks' illegal activities have come in the last month alone. We combed through these documents. Again and again, the charges made by Starbucks employees are the same. Violations alleged of Section 8 of the National Labor Relations Act, which asserts that an employer may not interfere with, restrain, or coerce employees. For months, More Perfect Union has revealed stories of Starbucks executives pummeling their workers with baseless fears and propaganda to smear unions. What Starbucks Workers United called a blatant shock and awe campaign, intended to psychologically punish prospective pro-union workers. Starbucks subjected workers to captive audience meetings and threatened to close stores, and the company even fired a popular manager because she questioned the company's tactics. Starbucks workers say the company is intentionally spying on their union gatherings, questioning employees about union activities. Workers are being threatened with job loss, warned that they'll be discharged or retaliated against if they side with the union. And recently, more and more organizing employees are stating that they have in fact been outright fired as a result of their pro-union activities. These brave Starbucks workers have not broken laws or tried to maliciously damage the company. No, their crime, in the company's eyes, is engaging in their constitutional right to organize. And they are organizing because they believe Starbucks can have a stronger business, one that retains its workers with good pay and benefits, offers opportunities for professional growth, all while maintaining a better and safer workplace. But Starbucks doesn't want to cede any power to workers, so it is increasingly retaliating in ways that they are trying to hide from the public eye. Growing more desperate as the union campaign has spread to over 150 Starbucks stores across 27 states, Starbucks has pivoted its strategy in recent weeks. They've replaced their CEO Kevin Johnson and brought back their former CEO Howard Schultz, who has a history of union busting, including widely condemned comments made during a mandatory meeting with workers in Buffalo last fall. The coffee giant is worried. Given that very few of its strategies have stopped the union movement so far, Starbucks has moved to the phase of straight-up illegality. Here's the proof. It began on January 25th. 2 Buffalo Starbucks locations had already voted to form a union. Another in Mesa, Arizona was in the process, and the workers were gaining steam within the company and in the press. On this Tuesday afternoon, a Starbucks district manager tried to intimidate 19-year-old Layla Dalton, a Phoenix employee, into quitting. The manager said she was suspending Layla and shutting down the store for the day. Her violation? Layla had texted her direct supervisor. According to an NLRB investigation, the manager began enforcing a previously unenforced rule prohibiting employees from communicating with supervisors by text message. Layla had texted her boss at least 12 times before this incident without any problems, but suddenly she was being suspended for it. Was Layla texting something inappropriate to her boss? No, she was communicating about the levels of staffing in the store. Just a few days before targeting Layla, Starbucks set its sights on another employee in the Phoenix store, Alyssa Sanchez. Sanchez was forced to quit because the company cut her hours. The NLRB determined this action was taken because Alyssa was supportive of the union and an ally of Layla's. A little over a month later, in March, More Perfect Union published Layla's recorded footage of the conversation she had with her supervisor back in late January. We spoke with one of her coworkers, Sophia Lugo, who defended Layla's work ethic. Lugo had her hours drastically reduced and was forced to quit the store. 3 Starbucks employees, 1 store in Phoenix, all targeted by upper management for union activity. This is part of an emerging company-wide pattern of union busting. A couple of weeks after Layla's encounter with Starbucks management in Phoenix, another disturbing incident occurred. On February 8th, 7 employees at a Memphis location were fired for purportedly letting unauthorized non-employees, media, in a few minutes after closing. A former Starbucks manager in that store told More Perfect Union that the reasons for the firing were specious and that it's definitely union busting. By mid-February, More Perfect Union was contacted by multiple union organizers who said they were being targeted by a new policy of reducing the work hours of union organizers. We reported that the company was trying to reduce the hours of these staffers to lay the foundation for subsequently terminating part-time employees after additional full-time hires were made. And within days, it happened just as we predicted. On February 20th, another illegal firing occurred. This time it was in Buffalo. Cassie Fleischer, a well-respected employee who had been at the company for 5 years, was suddenly terminated when she was told by a manager that the company would no longer be flexible with her work hours. In a Facebook post, Cassie wrote, "This is not the company I signed on to, and it just further proves we need a union in our stores." First in Phoenix, then in Memphis, and then Buffalo. By late February, when a Starbucks store in Mesa voted overwhelmingly to unionize, the campaign began to gather a lot of national attention. But less noticed and appreciated was that Starbucks corporate management was trying to systematically eliminate this perceived threat to the company. On March 3rd, Starbucks struck again. Danny Rojas, a Buffalo employee who had been with the company for 3.5 years, was fired. Rojas had worked a night shift at Trader Joe's and didn't want to be a half hour late to work, as they had been a few days earlier. Starbucks had forced them to take the morning shift if they wanted to keep their job, so they slept in their car just to be able to open the store at 5:30 a.m. It didn't matter. The company fired them that day. "This wouldn't be happening if I wasn't part of their organizing committee," Rojas told their supervisor. By March, Starbucks Workers United was witnessing instances all over the country that made clear what was truly going on. The company was at war with its own pro-union workforce. On March 14th, SB Workers United filed charges with the NLRB, stating, "These hours cuts are in swift response to workplace organizing campaigns at Starbucks stores around the country." The complaint says that the reductions have happened in at least 20 states, including Maryland, Florida, New York, Ohio, Colorado, California, and Texas. The reduction of hours has resulted in lost pay, has rendered or will soon render employees ineligible for benefits that have hours worked eligibility requirements, including healthcare coverage and the Starbucks College Achievement Plan, tuition coverage, and has or will soon result in the constructive discharge of Starbucks employees, the union complaint asserts. Sarah Pappen, a shift supervisor in Seattle, told us, "In the 8 years I've worked for Starbucks, I've never seen the company slash hours this severely or this widely. I've never seen us cut hours like this in March when our business is already ramping up for the season. Workers know what's going on. The only question is whether the company will get away with it." Labor law in America is weak and has been further undermined by a persistent corporate attack over decades. But the current NLRB General Counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, has vowed to use whatever authorities she has to go to bat for organizing workers. For years, corporations like Starbucks have assumed they can get away with their union-busting conduct with a simple slap on the wrist or a minor penalty well after they engage in the illegal conduct. Without much fanfare, Abruzzo last month issued a new initiative to change that dynamic. She vowed to take union-busting employers to court immediately. We talked to Abruzzo, and she explained her new initiative.
For me, if employers are engaging in conduct to truly nip in the bud an organizing effort and to squelch worker voice, I feel that the agency should be mandated to go into district court to get the employer to stop doing that.
Abruzzo laid out her fears that companies like Starbucks are banking on enforcers to be lax and challenging these illegal firings.
If we wait until the board decides the case, it'll be 3 years from now, and that's too late. And we need the action to take place right now.
If Abruzzo gets her way, Starbucks' next stop might be facing off against the United States government in a federal district court.
We would be mandated to go in and, stop the employer in its tracks when it comes to interfering with, employees wanting a union in their workplace.
Great coverage there. Unsurprising behavior from Starbucks. It's what is somewhat new is that despite the thorough and effective defanging of the NLRB, that there is still a little bit of pushback here. And there was a little pushback on Amazon too, that making them redo the Bessemer election, right? So I'm hopeful that they will be forced to face the NLRB in federal court. What they've done is brazenly illegal. And they don't care. They do it knowingly, and that's kind of the point, right? Huge shout out to Teresa for the super sticker there in the chat. We appreciate any and all donations. Thank you so much to Teresa. In a similarly, brazen and obvious example of an illegal firing, we have another more perfect union clip here going into cannabis workers who are organizing in Colorado. Once again, kind of a perfect week to do this with 420 just a few days ago. So this is more perfect union talking to an illegally fired cannabis worker in Colorado.
Fired them explicitly for union activity.
Based on that, we made the decision to part ways.
I mean, you guys know that's illegal, right? They made it clear from day one, they did not care about the law, they did not care about anything but their bottom line and their profits.
These cannabis workers are trying to form one of Colorado's first grow house unions. Their bosses started union busting immediately, firing and retaliating against them. Delays in the union election have only made things worse.
Yeah, I'd like to send a message to the owners of Green Dragon and to Ease Cannabis Delivery, the billion-dollar company that bought Green Dragon. You can go to hell, you're gonna go to hell, and all of your money has been stolen off of the backs of the workers who actually did the work, and you do not deserve a dime that you have.
Angelo Nickley worked at Green Dragon for just under a year.
First day at the facility, I walked in and I looked around and immediately thought to myself, this place needs an OSHA inspection. There's scum puddles on the floor, the weed is molded and powdery and dusty and dried out. It is horrible. This has been raised to management continuously, and they refuse to provide us even with paper masks, let alone N95 masks or respirators. They do not care if their workers live or die. It just built and built and built until one day we were talking about starting a petition to demand a break room. And I said, screw a petition, why don't we start a union?
Agricultural workers were excluded from the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, meaning that they're denied basic protections like the right to form a union. In 2021, Colorado expanded their state labor laws through the Agricultural Workers' Rights Bill to allow agricultural workers in Colorado to form a union.
These are basic human rights that are denied to these people because they happen to work in this industry.
That agricultural law being passed was a lifesaver in terms of our rights and our ability to be able to fight back legally against the Green Dragon Cannabis Company.
It's official!
And so we filed as agricultural workers. As soon as we found out that law was passed, we filed for a union election on July 27th of 2021, and we still haven't had our election yet.
Green Dragon has used the months since to engage in retribution and union busting tactics.
I sent a letter asking them to voluntarily recognize the will of over half of their employees and to come and negotiate with us in good faith. And in response to our letter, within the week, Green Dragon fired every single employee, rehired them back on as day-to-day staffers through a staffing agency called Staff Zone. And then right before that, they also sold the company to ease cannabis delivery in an effort to secure more capital. And they were told us that no benefits previously offered would be offered anymore, and they are only offering health insurance, and the new health insurance plan cost twice as much and covered half as much. And it was the most blatant anti-union thing they could have done.
Angelo, who helped lead the unionization efforts, said he was baselessly fired in March of 2022.
They would harass me. It was made clear that I was being watched by cameras 24/7 every time I was in the facility. They fired me almost immediately after we had an election day set.
You smoked weed on your morning break?
I did not.
Have a cigarette, shaped quantitator.
I was not smoking weed.
Okay. It's your second offense. It's a drug place pre-work zone. You're breaking state laws. You're breaking Green Dragon laws. You're breaking staff zone laws. You're wrecking my cars. You're a danger to others. You aren't even on time. Based on that, I'm asking you to leave the facility.
They accused me of breaking them. That's not even my department. I've never been in that department. They never allowed me to step foot in that part of the facility.
Just a week before a scheduled election, Green Dragon fired 2 data entry workers.
They fired them explicitly for union activity. This was recorded on video.
Last time I spoke to you about your interaction with the union, whether it's your apparel and the pins or attending the sanctioned events at lunch or any of the above. Based on that, we made the decision to part ways.
Yeah.
This is Regina. If you have any questions or comments, we can go over that.
I mean, you guys know that's illegal, right?
Well, it's not. You're not part of the bargaining unit, which was explained to you by Ryan the last conversation you had. So you're not eligible to participate as the leader of management. Right?
Oh, but I am. But for firing me because I'm a union member, that's illegal.
Later that day, they also fired my friend Jarrett, who has been with the union campaign from the start.
The firings were met with picketing from Green Dragon grow house workers and members of the UFCW Union Local 7.
By the end of our picket, Green Dragon had offered to rehire back Ethan and Tasha, who were the first 2 people fired, and they said Jared's firing was a computer error, which was obviously bullshit.
Because of continued delays from Governor Jared Polis's Labor Department, Green Dragon grow house workers are still waiting for their union election.
As far as I can see, the delay is being caused by either incompetence or lack of caring by the state to put any resources into the Agricultural Bill of Rights. Because the state failed to translate the election ballot and send it out, they just delayed our election by another month.
The election, originally scheduled for April 13th, has been delayed until May 25th. But workers say that the protections can't wait.
Working in a grow house, you develop a cough. I call it the Keith cough. Some people have called it green lung. Every morning you wake up and you hack. You hack for at least 20 to 45 minutes. Because in our case, it's because of a combination of powder mold, disintegrated plant particles, keef, pollen, also pesticides and whatever the hell else is in the air in a grow house. They don't give a shit about anybody who works in that facility, and they would rather see them die than pay $20 more to make them even have a little bit less health consequences for working there. We have one hope for having a livable workplace, and that is our union.
Pretty outrageous, you guys. They literally say, like, so because you were wearing a union pin and union attire and because you went to union meetings at lunch, you're fired. And he's like, you know that's illegal, right? And she's like, no, it's actually not illegal. Yes, it is. Just to be incredibly, unequivocally clear, that is illegal. Any form of firing somebody because they are organizing in their workplace, that is against federal law. Okay. Now we have right to work states, right? I'm sorry, not right to work. Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? This was covered by I think it was Sirota. there's a word, at-will employers. There it is. Sorry. At-will employment. A lot of states, including my state of Washington, is an at-will state, which makes it very difficult to enforce any of those laws. Because the employer can simply say it wasn't about organizing, it was some other random arbitrary reason. But they don't have to come up with a good reason. All they have to do is say it wasn't because you were organizing. But in that case, they're on video saying you're being fired because you're organizing and because you're wearing a union pin. That is brazenly illegal, you guys. That's brazenly illegal. But they're so emboldened because for decades in this country, those laws have had no teeth at all. So another example there, in addition to the Starbucks examples of very obvious, blatant, illegal activity and illegal firings. And we have one more perfect union here clip for you guys. This is about people who work in the video game industry and how that industry is quite exploitative and abusive. And we'll watch this, come back and discuss.
The leadership doesn't know what it's like to work on these games anymore. They don't understand the time and effort that it takes to go into because they've either never worked on games like that before, or they just, don't care.
With these large companies, you kind of just have to do what they say, right? And we've learned over the years that they're going to do the legal minimum required instead of the ethical maximum. My role in the gaming industry is under quality assurance.
Quality assurance testers are the folks who actually work with the game's software day by day to make sure that there's not issues or glitches.
It's our job to find issues, report them so they can get fixed, and so that the game can go out looking and feeling as best as it possibly can.
I started at Activision as a QA tester, and my experience there was horrible. I worked on Black Ops 3. I was night shift. I remember the lights would turn off after 9 p.m. and then we would get yelled at for spilling creamer. We would work 14-hour shifts at one point trying to get Black Ops 3 out. It was just insane. It felt like a dungeon.
Especially when I was working in VR games. As a QA tester, you would be in the headset anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day with essentially 2 small TV screens blaring into your eyes. It's worth noting that VR manufacturers actually suggest players only stick to 30 to 60 minutes a day. I personally have long-term, eye vision damage from that experience. I know other people too who had chronic motion sickness for a long time even after quitting their job.
The treatment of QA across the board, across the game industry, is a really huge ongoing problem.
I think that a lot of companies bank on, you get your dream job, you're working in video games, so they pay you low wages. They tell you that overtime isn't mandatory, but if you don't do the overtime, you're not called back.
We had been frustrated about pay for a long time. We had several testers who were on food stamps. We had people who were qualifying for SNAP. It was, frustrating to know that we were putting out this game that makes upwards of $5 million a day and couldn't see any of that return.
And in these places like, Irvine, where Blizzard is, and Los Angeles, and really expensive cities, quality assurance testers need to have 3 roommates to survive, and it's not even that, survivable.
I would figure for a game that makes as much as Call of Duty does, especially Warzone, there would be a way to somehow allocate those funds both to enough workers that you could keep all of your QA testers still working and maybe even pay them a little more.
I think that these companies have kind of this weird labor practice where they have contractors, but they will promise them that they'll hire them to full-time and then lay them off after 6 months so they don't have to give them benefits. And then they'll tell you, oh, come back next year and work again. So they almost have permanent temporary. I think in gaming alone, a lot of women don't feel like they belong in the space, and it kind of, working in video games, it kind of manifests there as well. There's a lot of misogyny and there's a lot of sexual harassment, discrimination. The people that are the power and the higher ups there, they can utilize contractors because they will do anything to try to get hired. And I feel like that puts, marginalized people in a bad position to be abused. And that's where you see a lot of those things. They want a job, they want to work in their dream job, and that gets kind of taken advantage of.
What caused the Raven software strike in December was the letting go of 12 of our associates in QA. All in good standing, they had committed no fireable offense and their performance was fine.
Probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had working at a company like that was this constant palpable feel of fear around the room that you would be next on the chopping block. Your head would and it would roll.
And in response to that, into what we saw was something completely arbitrary and unfair, we sort of took up arms against it. We had gone to leadership several times prior to us unionizing, prior to any of this, asking, hey, here are the changes we'd like to see. How can we open up a dialogue? We'd like to improve things. We'd like to, get things, rolling, and just nothing was going through. And the letting go of those 12 testers was sort of the final straw for a lot of us, I think. And it proved that they weren't going to open up that dialogue with us. They weren't willing to put us at the table. So we are making our own seat at the table.
It's been a really long, multi-year, I think, effort to get to this point where, even just 10, 15 years ago, it was not terribly common for workers to be actively talking about conditions in our industry, right? Because we're very passionate about games, see it as a passion to work in the industry, and we're just grateful to be there at all. We're starting to see this tipping point.
As usual, fantastic work, you guys. At More Perfect US on Twitter. Follow their work. They're More Perfect Union on YouTube as well, and they have a website, moreperfect.us. So a couple of points on that last one that I think are kind of, individually worth pointing out. The first one, we talked about this before in a number of other industries as well, but one of them pointed out that they're misclassified, right? So they're contractors, and the company implies to them, we're basically going to hire you full time, so you're going to have full-time wages. Then they just lay you off weeks or months later, and then encourage you to come back the next year. So what they effectively get to do is have full-time workers at a cheap price while they don't actually have to give out any benefits, and they aren't held to account for the short-term employment situation. If they were actual employees, there would be avenues for those employees to keep receiving benefits or to get unemployment when they're let go. But because they're contractors, this is what Uber does. This is what a lot of trucking companies do. They're contractors, right? When you classify them as contractors, you now don't have to meet a lot of the aspects of labor law because they're not your employer. So they essentially get to keep full-time people around cheap and not have to deal with a lot of the protections that workers have been afforded over the years through other labor movements, right? So that's one point. And the second point that I thought was really quite interesting is a number of them touched on, because we all kind of think of it as a dream to be in this industry, that gets taken advantage of too. And this reminds me of another story covered by More Perfect Union. That's minor league baseball players who won better conditions and better compensation and things. I've talked a number of times about with sports, you guys. I think we think of the top line, oh, it's so ridiculous that so-and-so makes $30 million a year to be good at a sport. And I agree, totally ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, right? Now, I'd rather it go to that person than the owner or the TV network that are the other groups that profit massively off of sports. But, I think in that case, it's very similar where these minor league players it's for them, it's a lifelong dream to try to make it to the big leagues. And so they get taken advantage of, and the teams feel like they can do this because, well, you should just be happy to fucking be here. And then you end up getting exploited for years on end, right? And treated poorly and have your health and your time wasted. And I think that a similar dynamic presented itself here with these workers in the gaming industry where they feel so fortunate to be doing something that they enjoy and that they're passionate about. And the company takes advantage of that and basically says, well, you're going to work for almost nothing because we know there are a lot of people who want to work in this industry, right? So great work from More Perfect Union, you guys. And as always, I encourage my audience and implore my audience to get involved in the labor movement wherever it presents itself. Support workers if they are striking in your area or unionizing in your area. Don't cross those picket lines. Contribute to mutual aid funds. Whatever you can do. Join a demonstration, whatever it might be. You guys, I almost never go to Starbucks. I'm a huge coffee addict, but I make my coffee at home. On occasion, if I am out of coffee and I'm out and about, I will stop by Starbucks and get a coffee. And I've made a point the last couple months to just tell them, hey, you guys, the community supports you if you want to unionize. Like, I want to make sure you guys know that we have your back. And I encourage my audience to say things like that to workers in any given industry, right? When you're in a place and someone is serving you and that person is obviously being exploited and undercompensated and the company is taking advantage of them, mention like, hey, your customer base, your community, we support your right to organize. We will have your back if you decide to unionize. Talk to your coworkers about it, I encourage you all to have those conversations. I encourage you to support any movements that are going on in your area. If you happen to work at a place that is not organized, I encourage you to start talking to your coworkers about it, you guys. I know it can seem daunting and terrifying because the companies can and will retaliate. And I don't want to minimize that either. I understand people's hesitancy. I really do. I'm not asking somebody who's barely scraping by to sacrifice their job here. But have those conversations. And if you're in an environment where you feel like you're exploited and taken advantage of and abused and undercompensated, have those conversations. Look into how you might go about unionizing, you guys. This wave is going to continue. It's going to be the catalyst for change if we ever achieve it. And I want to encourage everybody to get involved in whatever capacity you possibly can. Huge shout out to More Perfect Union, as always, for the absolutely fantastic coverage of this labor push. And a quick little plug, you guys. I have an interview this week with Len Harris, who came on previously. She works at a Starbucks in Colorado. They just won their union vote here just this last week. So we're going to have Len back on to talk about the process there. Huge congratulations to Len and her store in Colorado and all the other workers, baristas, etc., that are finding success in this movement. So we're going to move on here to a fantastic piece once again from David Sirota. You guys, he's just an excellent writer just fantastic work. The levernews.com, really encourage you all to support them. One of the few outlets that I know I say this all the time that I really do think does consistently good work in this field. And he has an excellent piece here about the state of American politics. He calls it Joker America, how Joe Biden and Democrats are helping Republicans convince the country that government and politics don't matter. Is it just me, or is it getting crazier out there? That's a famous quote from the Joker, of course. Quote, "I'm going to become the Joker," is one of the internet's most poignant shorthands, referencing Todd Phillips' 2019 film Noir. The phrase describes becoming so thoroughly disillusioned that one loses faith in everything. The process is a dark descent, individual indignity after interpersonal insult after institutional injustice prompts a downward spiral from George Costanza screaming, "We're living in a society," to nihilists barking, "We believe in nothing, Lebowski," to finally just a depressed clown laughing at the idea of anything mattering at all. Data about mental health suggests that even the most preternaturally chipper among us have tasted the Joker pill during the pandemic. But what if that Jokerification isn't fleeting? And what if it's happening at a cultural, societal, and institutional level? What happens then? This is the epochal question because both parties' leaders have accepted Jokerification as the new permanent normal, and the Biden White House is actively convincing a generation to believe nothing will fundamentally change. Great reference there again, you guys. David is just so fucking excellent. The timing of this tailspin couldn't be worse. In America, still reeling from the meltdown of the early Obama years, the Trump presidency and the pandemic seemed ready to hope against hope that Democrats' unexpected Washington trifecta would provide one last opportunity to put the country back on track. For a brief moment, Democrats would have the lawmaking power to mitigate at least one of the myriad stresses: healthcare, housing, education, retirement, climate survival that working class Americans must worry about every day. But with corruption and capitulation winning the day in Washington, George Bush's butchered aphorism describes the present mood of a demoralized Democratic electorate. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again. Great use of one of Bush's best quotes ever, too. President Joe Biden started out in a much different direction. Right after being sworn in, he signed an American Rescue Plan that rejected President Barack Obama's top-down bailouts for bankers and rightly provided direct economic aid to millions of non-rich people. Of course, that was even a lie because it was supposed to be a $2,000 check, and it was actually $12,000. As poverty subsequently dropped, Biden's poll numbers temporarily skyrocketed, seemingly halting the ascent of Republicans' authoritarian mob. And I just want to take a moment on that point, you guys, to note that when Biden did things that were even tepidly progressive, that is when he was the most popular. That is when the party was the most popular. Even though it was a lie, the whole $1,200 check, it was at least $1,200, right? Pretty immediately following that, his approval rating peaked. The child tax credit, again, I think it should go a lot further, you guys. They boasted about taking roughly half of children out of poverty. I think you should take all children out of poverty. But again, tepidly progressive policy that was very popular and that helped Democrats and Biden's approval ratings peak. And then what do? They let it expire. They only set it up to last for a year. They don't even make it permanent. There's no structural change. There's no actual change to the underlying problems. So the point is, when they actually do things, they are popular, and yet they seem to have bought into this kind of jokerification, as David is referring to it, of American politics, and yet those poll numbers would kind of undermine that analysis, right? So anyway, carrying on here. But now less than 7 months before the midterm elections, things have stalled, and Biden seems intent on accelerating rather than combating a rising tide of disillusionment. Tossing the GOP a lifeline, he has reverted to his familiar formula that some warned about during the Democratic presidential primaries. Amid intensifying crisis, he promises big changes that could help the working class and then prevents those changes from actually happening. It's occurred over and over again. He speechifies about the need to address crises. He then makes worse. He blames Congress for gridlock, but won't pressure lawmakers or use his executive authority to do things. He promises policy reforms that his own agencies decline to implement, or in the case of student loans, outright oppose, still appealing findings from courts that would allow people to discharge their debt through bankruptcy court. The baiting and switching is a feature, not a bug, a deliberate strategy predicated on a corporate media ecosystem that ignores the gap between White House rhetoric and action. Ensconced in a bubble of blue wave emojis, Team Blue hashtags, and genuflecting punditry, Biden and his staff likely assume they can rhetorically placate voters and yet enrich the Biden campaign donors, crushing those voters. And they expect nobody will catch on to the ruse. They appear to assume that as a pile of unsigned executive orders sit in the Oval Office, voters will believe his media loyalists claim that there's just not much President Joe Biden can do about anything. But despite the dearth of accountability journalism, the public seems to sense the gaslighting. Biden's approval ratings are plummeting and anti-government sentiment has spiked as his strategy joker pills the country. The rest of that piece was also fantastic. You guys go follow The Lever and their work, levernews.com. David Sirota does excellent work. I think he's spot on here. The Democrats, this is exactly what they did under Obama, too. Not only did they have a majority in both chambers and the White House, they had a super majority in the Senate for 2 years. And what did they do? They gave us a health care plan written by the Heritage Foundation and initially endorsed by Richard Nixon and Bob Dole and Chuck Grassley, and first implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. That's what they did with their super majority and a majority in both chambers and the White House. And what has Biden done? With, I grant you, not a supermajority, in fact, very thin majority in the Senate, but he has both chambers and he has the White House. Number of things that he could do by executive action, and he has steadfastly refused for well over a year now. Even things that he promised to do via executive action, things like immigration reform, things like student debt cancellation, et cetera, et cetera. When something like $15 minimum wage comes up in the initial reconciliation bill, what did they do? They capitulated and folded to the parliamentarian, who is a powerless advisor of the Senate. Democrats beg you for power, fear-mongering about how terrible things would be if Republicans were left in charge. And then when we vote them into power, they cry, that they're totally handcuffed and that they can't do anything. And I mean, they just prove how useless and worthless and feckless they are. And then when election cycle comes back around, they fearmonger about the big, scary, terrible Republicans and promise to actually do things. And each time that they do this, you guys, more and more people learn. That's just the bottom line, right? We can laugh at the naivete of people who still support the Democrats, but in a lot of cases, what it is, quite frankly, you guys, it's just people that aren't paying much attention. And I don't mean that as like an insult or a condemnation. People have fucking lives. People work full-time plus. People have families. People have kids to raise. People have hobbies and friends that they'd like to spend time with. They have lives that they'd like to enjoy. I don't begrudge people not keeping up on politics. You know, but I think a lot of what the Democrats rely on is that very superficial analysis on behalf of a lot of voters. I think they rely on that sort of indifference or the sort of the way that people are kind of detached from the day-to-day news. And then, you know, they prey on that. It sort of almost turns to like apathy, but they get to take advantage of it because people are so beaten down by the political process that they just fall into the lesser evilism stuff that we were talking about earlier. So Democrats talk at least a tepidly progressive game during the election cycle, then they do nothing and claim that the Republicans are stopping them from doing anything. Well, people are starting to see through it, man. It's just people are just they're done with that game. And you know, by the way, if the party actually cared about keeping Donald Trump out of office, you know what they would do? They would do popular things. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, the promises Biden made that he's reneged on, a lot of those things are incredibly popular. They're not nearly left enough for my liking, right? For me, they're compromise positions. But things like canceling $10,000 of student debt for every single borrower. Are you telling me you think that's not popular? Are you telling me you don't think that's going to help Democrats against Trump in November and against Republicans in the midterms here in November? I mean, you're out of your damn mind if you think that's the case. Of course, it's wildly popular. It polls over 60%. By the way, the people that it polls high with are the very people Democrats need to come out and vote. You know, things, I mean, getting money out of politics polls like over 90%. Federal jobs guarantee, way up there in polling. Medicare for all polls in the mid 70s. You know, there are so many things that Joe Biden could do that would be wildly popular, and he has just steadfastly refused it. We refuse to do it. Minimum wage hikes, that all of that stuff polls like in the 70s or 80s. You guys, a lot of these positions, it's like they're so unbelievably popular that to not do them is stupid on the surface. But Democrats talk themselves into doing nothing. And then they bitch and moan when progressives are disenfranchised. And it's like, well, maybe if you actually did something, we might show up for you. Of course, they'll never learn that lesson. The lesson to DC Democrats is always, we went too far to the left and we must capitulate more to the conservative fucks. So they want, this is what so bothers me, you guys. And I have never found a way to like express this, what I actually feel and mean about this. They both get to, the partisan Democrats simultaneously get to portray themselves as the most anti-Trump, the most anti-Republican people in the room, while their entire policy position, while all of their political actions are to capitulate and grovel to the very people they claim to be opposing. And then progressives come in and they're like, actually, we think we should be to the left of that. We think we should oppose Republicans much more than y'all are opposing Republicans. And what do the Democrats do? They accuse us of supporting Republicans or somehow helping Republicans or somehow helping Trump. While their entire strategy is to endlessly capitulate to Republicans and Trump, right? Joe Manchin voted with Trump like half the fucking time during Trump's presidency. Democrats say, oh, you got to support Manchin, though, because otherwise Trump might get his way. And this narrative gets like it gets to exist without being called out for the obvious inconsistencies within it, the obvious contradictions that exist within it, right? People say, oh, you got to vote Biden in the primary because otherwise you're helping Trump. Who's closer to Trump's political beliefs, you guys, Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders? Like, it is so fucking ridiculous to me that the Democrats have gotten away with this narrative game and that nobody has been bothered to call them out on it. So anyway, just really, really fantastic stuff there from Sirota. Want to show you guys a clip here. Speaking of the student debt issue in particular, this is Simone Sanders, who is a Biden spokeswoman. She went on, I want to say MSNBC. It's one of the cable outlets. And she's basically asked, yeah, it's MSNBC. She's basically asked, like, why won't he just cancel some student debt? He promised it. It's popular. You guys are all worried about what's going to happen in the midterms. Why won't he do popular things that he can do? They finally asked this question, not as strongly as I would like, but they asked the question. Here's Simone Sanders' utterly ridiculous, false, deceitful response to that question.
Simone, we got about 30 seconds left. One of those low-hanging fruits that Corbyn's talking about, probably the issue of canceling $10,000 worth of student debt. Why hasn't President Biden not done that yet?
Well, it's my understanding that, yes, that is one of the campaign promises President Biden made. It's my understanding that the White House feels as though that Congress can send them a bill. And if Congress sends a bill, the president would sign the bill, and that's something that the White House believes would be more long-lasting. But I also know that they hear the people who have been protesting in the streets. They are getting the calls from members of Congress and advocates. And I think that they're going to be poised to do something. What that something is, well, I'll have to wait and see.
That was like 20 seconds from Simone Sanders, and she managed to contradict herself in those 20 seconds. It might not have even been 20 seconds. At first, she says, well, we're waiting on a bill from Congress, right? So you ran for a federal office just so you could take that seat and then pretend it has no power? Guys, this has been litigated. This argument has been had. The education secretary has the power to cancel student debt. Full stop, end of story. Pretending that you need a bill from Congress is deceitful. Misrepresents the situation. They don't need a bill from Congress, and the Biden administration should stop pretending that the White House has no fucking power. It's outrageous, okay? First thing. But the second point, at the end, she says, but we're hearing the complaints. We're hearing calls from lawmakers and advocates, and I think they're going to do something about it. Well, which is it? Which is it? Do you need the bill from Congress, or are you going to do something? And if it's the latter, then why haven't you yet? You've been in office for what? Coming up on a year and a half, a year and a couple months. Why haven't you done anything? You promised this on the campaign. You can do it via executive order. You could have done it day one. They still steadfastly refuse to do it. They complain about that they're going to get mollywopped by Republicans in November. Won't do popular things to prevent it from happening. I mean, it's so outrageous. She had 15 or 20 seconds and she managed to contradict herself right there. She just made David's point from the article that we just read. Made his point through and through. So they can't even figure out which side of the narrative they want to be on. They can't figure out if they want to say, oh, we're probably going to do something, even if it's way too little. We're probably going to do something. Or if they're just going to sit here and say, no, ask Congress. Oh, God. What an embarrassment. What an absolute embarrassment. If you think that performance on MSNBC is going to buy you any votes in November, I got a bridge to sell you. Ridiculous stuff. So we have a story here to go over in Jacobin. We talked a little bit earlier about the military-industrial complex and the impact they have over narratives and actions of the United States and the narratives that the media pushes. This is by Danica Katovich. I apologize if I butchered that name. Once again, it's Jacobin. Lockheed Martin and friends don't want you to know what they're up to. The boards of defense companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing are encouraging their shareholders to vote against transparency measures. Maybe the U.S. government shouldn't fund companies whose profits would be harmed by the collection of human rights data. Today, Lockheed Martin, the world's largest weapons manufacturer, will host its annual shareholder meeting. Next week, Raytheon Technologies will hold its own with Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman following hot on their heels. Those are the prime five. For those that don't know, those are the five major military or weapons manufacturers and military contractors for the United States military. Like most annual shareholder meetings, those in attendance are being asked to vote on a set of proposals. The boards of the respective companies suggest how they should vote and make a case for why. The boards have an obligation to help shareholders make more money from their investments. Hearing their advice on proposals is part of that deal. Just a real quick note, you guys, these companies who rely on the United States government committing and supporting atrocities around the world and supporting governments who commit atrocities around the world, these companies who rely on that for business will justify the immorality of their business model by hiding behind fiduciary responsibilities and saying, no, we're obligated. We have to. this will be more profitable, so it would be illegal for us not to do it because we have to act in the best interest of our shareholders. They hide behind the fiduciary responsibilities, and I think that's something to look out for. But what does it mean to profit from an investment in a weapons manufacturer? Raytheon CEO Greg Haynes responded to the escalation of tensions in Ukraine a few months ago by saying, "I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from it." The Joe Biden administration announced on April 13th that the United States would spend $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine. The package includes 500 Javelin anti-tank missiles jointly manufactured by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. When it comes to the defense industry, we can't separate our profits from war. General Dynamics, the company responsible for a component of the bomb that was dropped on a school bus in Yemen, killing dozens of children, is asking shareholders to vote against a proposal for the company to provide a human rights report. The proposal, if put into effect, would require General Dynamics to release a report on the company's human rights due diligence process to identify, assess, prevent, mitigate, and remedy actual and potential human rights impacts associated with high-risk products and services, including those in conflict-related areas. Okay. High-risk products. Yeah, do you think that maybe fighter jets and missiles and bombs would fall under that category? It's hilarious how they define these things. The shareholder proposal cites an Amnesty International report from 2019 that concluded that the company did not meet its human rights due diligence responsibilities. The proposal also suggests that failing on the human rights front may have legal, financial, and reputational risks for shareholders. The board of directors at General Dynamics suggests shareholders vote against this proposal because they don't believe there is additive value to an amorphous human rights report, and it would destroy significant shareholder value. There's the point. It would destroy shareholder value. So great reporting from Jacobin on how the military industrial complex continues to churn along. It is a machine that does not stop, and it feeds off of things like this invasion of Ukraine. It feeds off of things like the genocide in Yemen. It feeds off of the massive contracts we have with Israel to help them commit their ethnic cleansing campaign against Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza. And, you know, it's not an incentive structure that is in anybody's best interest unless you happen to be a shareholder at Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or General Dynamics or Boeing or Northrop Grumman or any of the other gigantic weapons manufacturers and military contractors. Just, you know, it's remarkable, again, how brazen and blatant the corruption really is, and how underreported it is, how the press leaves that alone. We covered last week how they'll have people on who literally make money from these companies, and they'll just treat those people as unbiased experts on international relations and on foreign policy, right? They'll introduce them as some seat they held at the State Department or something, former such and such, former ambassador or whatever, or former Pentagon official. And it's like, oh, we're going to leave out the fact that they take a bunch of money from Raytheon and Boeing, right? Leave that part out. Lloyd Austin, current Secretary of Defense, was literally on the Raytheon board when Biden nominated him. So the revolving door here, the lack of transparency, the media's complicit role in this sort of corruption is astounding, and how direct it is and explicit it is also quite astounding. Great reporting from Jacobin there. And I mentioned Israel and West Bank and Gaza. We have an update here. The violence has continued. This is in Al Jazeera. Palestinians denounce Israel's move to close Gaza crossing. Move comes after Israeli army accused Hamas of firing 3 rockets into Israel late on Friday. And for those who don't know, you guys, like one of the reasons that this occupation is so harmful for Palestinians is that it severely restricts their ability to move around, right? Like, you have to constantly be going through security. There are people who have to go through security numerous times a day just to get to and from work, waiting in lines that are sometimes hours long. Israeli authorities do not like to let people see this kind of stuff. But this is one of the ways that they severely impact the lives of Palestinians, is by having them under constant surveillance and security, and disallowing them from moving freely around. So they're now going to use, again, they'll use the excuse of Hamas firing rockets, but of course they'll conveniently start the story at Hamas fired rockets. They'll leave out like, oh, Hamas, who is fighting against our ethnic cleansing campaign, Hamas, who's pushing back against our illegal settlements and occupation, against our war crimes. They'll leave that part out and they'll just start with, well, Hamas fired some rockets, so we had to shut this shit down. Very convenient place to start the story. Carrying on here. Israel's decision to close its only crossing for Palestinian workers coming from the Gaza Strip has been denounced as collective punishment for the impoverished territory's 2 million residents who have lived under an Israeli-Egyptian blockade for nearly 15 years. The move announced on Saturday comes after the Israeli army accused Hamas, the armed group that rules the Gaza Strip, of firing 3 rockets into Israel late on Friday as tensions continue to mount during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. One hit an open field inside Israel, while another fell inside the Palestinian territory, the Israeli army said, without providing details on the third one. Earlier this week, the Israeli army said 4 rockets were launched from Gaza, but were intercepted by air defense systems. Quote, following the rockets fired towards Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip last night, it was decided that crossings into Israel for Gazan merchants and workers through the Erez crossing will not be permitted this coming Sunday. COGAT, a unit of the defense ministry responsible for Palestinian civil affairs, said in a statement. The Gaza Workers Union said the closure was collective punishment and would hurt the already suffering economy, where employment hovers around 50%. It said the timing of the closure, just before the Eid al-Fitr holiday, I apologize if I butchered that, marking the end of Ramadan, would compound the pain for families struggling to make ends meet. And the other part that kind of got left out here is the violence that's been going on throughout. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen the clips of the IDF harassing and inflicting violence upon people in what's the name of the mosque there in Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque or something like that. That is one of the holiest, one of the holiest sites in Islam, and the IDF has inflicted violence upon people who are worshiping there. They have harassed people out on the streets. I've seen plenty of videos of this shared online. They've continued dropping bombs on Gaza, but what they'll do is they'll highlight a few missiles coming their way, which they easily can shoot down most of the time with the Iron Dome that we have provided them. And they will use that to justify further violence. And I do have a couple of clips to show you guys here, just so that you have an idea of what was actually happening in Gaza. This is from a couple nights ago. Does that look like look like a place that's inflicting the violence or being victimized by the violence? It's pretty obvious, right? And I have one more clip to show you guys. This one's actually somewhat heartwarming. This is IDF, heavily armed IDF forces being confronted by a group of Palestinians in Bethlehem. So this is very short but encouraging. This is I love seeing this. So. You want to know how to win? That's how you win. That's how you win. And you know, again, I really want to emphasize, you guys. Let's show that one more time. Let's just show that one more time, because I want you to just ask yourself, which of these two sides looks more like the aggressor? Which of these two sides showed up for a fight and which did not? Okay, let's just watch one more time and note the visual. Reminds me of when American cops show up in full-blown fucking riot gear with assault weapons and then say that the other side is the one that's there to spark violence or, you know, be unruly. It's very obvious who is showing up for a riot, right? It's the IDF, it's the American cops, and then they claim that they're just acting in response or in defense. You don't get to be an illegal occupying force and then claim self-defense. This is the same thing the United States has done all throughout the Middle East, right? We say, oh, we did that attack in Syria because we thought our troops in Iraq were threatened, and so it was self-defense because our occupying troops were like, it's this mind fuck of an attempt to justify further violence. IDF doing exactly that there. So The violence in Gaza continues, and the illegal occupation, the illegal settlements in the West Bank, all of it continues. They are now shutting down the crossing for workers in Gaza to get to their places of employment and back. This is just it's further oppression, you guys. It's a further sort of act of control. It's a part of a strategy to inflict a genocide upon a population. And, you know, the United States continuing to support this while we want to claim that we're on the side of humanity, and that we oppose war crimes and war criminals, right? While we're pointing the finger at Putin, we're still engaging in war crimes in Yemen. We're still engaging in war crimes in Syria and in Somalia. We're still supporting war crimes in Gaza and in the West Bank. We're still engaged in war crimes in Iraq, like on and on, right? On and on and on. So, anyhow, I really hope that people understand that after that, what was it, month or two of violence, like a year ago, early last summer, a little less than a year ago, whatever it was, it was announced that there was a ceasefire, right? And after that, it seems like the media attention about the violence being inflicted upon Palestinians sort of subsided, and yet the violence picked right back up, right? Perhaps in less magnitude, a little bit less happening all at once. But the violence has continued. A lot of nights I see tweets from reporters saying, yeah, Gaza's getting bombed right now by Israel. You know, happens a lot. They're also still bombing Syria. And, you know, I mean, I see these reports all the time, but the coverage of it has subsided ever since that ceasefire was signed. So I just want to keep it front and center. I want everybody to understand that, while the threat that this conflict poses to Israeli civilians is sort of an up and down thing, right? There really is only a threat to Israeli civilians when the fighting really escalates. But there's a constant oppression of and violence being inflicted upon the Palestinians. The settlements, the occupation, all of that is a constant form of violence being inflicted on the Palestinians. So when the press stops covering it and we think, oh, it's relatively peaceful right now, right? What that means is those being oppressed are still being oppressed. Those doing the oppressing are comfortable, right? So I encourage everybody to keep that one front and center, because those crimes are ongoing and our support for those crimes also very much ongoing. So we have an update here that might be a somewhat positive update on the issue of a ban on stock trading in Congress. This is an issue, obviously, that caught a lot of attention when Nancy Pelosi opposed it a couple months back. She obviously one of the most, one of the biggest benefactors of the insider trading that Congress is allowed to engage in. But we're seeing more and more of a push here. I think from the grassroots in this case, I think from public pressure in this case, to enact some sort of ban. There are a number of bills that have been proposed by a number of people of both parties in the Senate and in the House to try to curtail this. We're going to read here from Insider. A bipartisan group of 19 lawmakers is laying out 3 key parameters for a stock trading ban following the House's first hearing on the issue. On the heels of the first House hearing on reforming the rules around stock ownership in Congress, a bipartisan group of lawmakers will pressure the Committee on House Administration to move forward on an outright ban on stock trading by members of Congress, a source with knowledge of the effort told Insider. Democratic Reps Jared Golden of Maine and Abigail Spanberger of Virginia will send a letter on Wednesday to the committee's leadership asking for a formal markup of strong legislation to ban members of Congress from directly owning or trading stocks while in office. The letter's other 17 co-signers include 2 Republicans, Matt Gaetz, believe it or not, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, along with progressive and moderate Democrats. Golden led a letter in January, including many of the same lawmakers who called for House leadership to swiftly bring a stock trading ban bill to the floor. Quote, Americans across the political spectrum support banning members of Congress from trading stocks, reads the duo's letter, which was addressed to Democratic Chair Zoe Lofgren of California and Republican ranking member Rodney Davis of Illinois. Quote, if we seek to write off their concerns with a toothless gimmick, they will see through it and continue to mistrust their elected officials, they added. We'll see if this actually gathers any momentum or not, but it's just, I think some of the nitty gritty details are what the fight is actually going to come down to. So there's debate about whether or not spouses and dependent children should be included. They obviously should, in Pelosi's case, her husband is kind of a big wig investor, and that's where a lot of their money comes from, right? So she has the inside knowledge, he does the investing. And there are a number of other members whose spouses trade as well. So that's an obvious one. And another aspect of it that is going to probably be contentious is what happens to current investments for those who are elected. So there are wealthy members of Congress who are decrying the fact that they would have to put their money into a blind trust. They're claiming it's too expensive to set that up and all this kind of stuff. By the way, for multimillionaires to complain about that stuff, I mean, just sit down and shut the fuck up. Nobody cares. Crocodile tears for the multimillionaire senators who have to set up a blind trust so that they can take office. I mean, which one do you want? If you don't want to set up the blind trust, then don't fucking run for the Senate. Easy. Done. Decided. Over with. You get to keep trading all that you want. You know? But the other aspect of this is, you guys, like, if you don't want to set up the blind trust, but you do want to be a member of the House or the Senate, then just sell all your stocks. Sell it all off. Stop being invested. It's very simple. It's very simple. What they're actually decrying is their inability to continue insider trading and making money off of the information that they're privy to because of their position in Congress. So we'll see. That's another one of those I'm hopeful but not naive enough to expect it to actually happen kind of a stories, right? I would like to see that go forward for obvious reasons. It's brazen corruption, and it's yet another pressure that works against working class and progressive people, because if a member of Congress is invested in a corporation or a bank or a big oil company or any of that stuff, they're going to be disinclined from regulating that industry or from cracking down on that company or from supporting labor organizing or anything along those lines, because that would cut into their profits on their investment, right? So there's a number of reasons that this needs to get passed. I'm not expecting it will, but it looks like there is at least some momentum, born from public pressure that is getting this pushed in the right direction, at least. A little light thing I wanted to show you guys here, and huge shout out, by the way, to Jules, our COO at Real Progressives, for bringing this to my attention. This is just a fantastic GIF. You guys can see here, it's a translator. Propaganda to English, right? So when you see in the media some propaganda, this is to help translate certain terms. So we'll take a look here. Officer involved shooting. Police murdered someone, right? The translation. Obviously correct. Spike in retail theft, protecting property over people, right? That's what police are there to do, right? Criminal, human being. Yeah. Armed man dies, police kill man. Yeah, and then they come back to officer involved shooting. So those are just a few translations there. I thought that was really both hilarious and useful. It's from defund MPD at defund_MPD on Twitter. I'll go ahead and give them a follow. Oh, it will not let me follow them. Go follow them on my behalf at defund_MPD. And huge shout out to Jules for bringing that one to my attention, because I just think that is absolutely hilarious. And we do not have a thread this week from Alec Karakatsanis, although I'm sure we will next week, diving into the details of propaganda as we often do. So I wanted to bring you guys that GIF. Really quite hilarious. And they're calling out the Washington Post in that tweet, for those who didn't notice. So yet another example of a major and powerful paper engaging in propaganda. So I actually meant to bring this up during the earlier segment about the state of politics that Sirota went into, but this is in the Huffington Post. It's Elizabeth Warren calling out Kevin McCarthy as a liar and a traitor. Quote, "This is really the illness that pervades the Republican leadership right now, that they say one thing to the American public and something else in private," she said. Okay, let's dive into that for a second. Is it true that the Republican Party says one thing in public and then another thing in private? 100%. Absolutely the case. Is it true that corruption drives the Republican Party's decision-making? 100%. Absolutely the case. So what Warren is saying is not in a vacuum incorrect. What bothers me about this is the obvious hypocrisy here, right? Joe Biden makes all these promises on the campaign trail while he's telling his big donors nothing will fundamentally change. Is that not saying one thing in public and another thing in private? Are any of us under the illusion that what Hillary Clinton was saying to all those Wall Street firms she gave speeches to, are you, any of you believe that what she was saying to them is exactly the same thing she was saying on the campaign trail to working class people to try to win over their votes? Anybody under that impression? Anybody under the impression that Pelosi says the same things to her donors as she says to the public? Chuck Schumer? Anyone under that impression for Chuck? Anyone under the impression that Joe Biden is saying the same things to the special interest groups that have access to him as he is saying to the public? You think the Rachetti brothers are hearing the same thing from Joe Biden as you and I are? I mean, please. For Elizabeth Warren to come out and criticize the Republicans like this, while her own party is just as guilty of the exact same thing, is outrageous, you guys. It's just outrageous. I don't want to do the false equivalency thing. There are a number of areas where Republicans are worse. This is not one of them. Democrats are just as bad. In fact, in this case, Democrats might even be worse because there are at least some issues that Republicans will kind of just own. Like, yeah, we're monsters. We're awful. We're evil, right? We are literally like cartoonish bad guys, and we're going to own that and put it right out in front. There are a lot of issues where they have no problem doing that. There are also like a lot of issues where the Democrats talk a good game, or at least a decent game, and do the exact opposite, right? Take money from the very industries and powers that be that they are claiming they're going to keep in check. So I was just, it's no fucking defense of Kevin McCarthy, right? Obviously, Elizabeth Warren is correct about Kevin McCarthy. What bothers me is the unwillingness to acknowledge that that problem exists in both parties. And I'd also point out, you guys, Bernie was at his most popular when he was willing to call out the Democrats. And as he has gained a little bit more like power on the inside, he has seemed to walk away from that. And that's disappointing, very disappointing. But it's also affected how much influence he has publicly, right? He's still the most popular senator in the country by a very wide margin. But he doesn't have that same kind of, do you guys remember, like, okay, one of the states I volunteered in 2020 was Nevada. I went to Las Vegas and volunteered for Bernie's campaign. The happiest few days of my entire life were right after that Nevada primary, when we really sincerely thought that Bernie was well on his way to winning the nomination. And then the Super Tuesday stuff happened, and Clyburn, and it all collapsed, right? But at that point in time, Bernie Sanders was actually criticizing the Democratic Party. And I just want to make that point, that I don't think the Elizabeth Warrens of the world have to blindly defend something that is as indefensible as the Democratic Party. So this comes off laughable. It comes off like you're beclowning yourself, in a sense, because everybody knows that what you're saying about the Republicans applies to both parties, and you're obviously only saying it about the Republicans. So, and guys, I just want to clarify, like, when I get up here and critique, I mean, Elizabeth Warren, ever since 2020, I can't call her a progressive, but when I get up here and critique someone who is even relatively on the left of the political spectrum in this country, like the Squad or Bernie or anyone, I want to make clear, like, I don't take fucking pleasure in that, you guys. I wish like hell there was a group of powerful lawmakers who were actually doing my bidding and the bidding of my audience. I wish we actually had a caucus to turn to and support. I don't take pleasure in having to sit here and constantly point out how even those who are closest to us in power are constantly betraying us. I don't take pleasure in that. I don't take pleasure in pointing out how incompetent their messaging is. I really don't, but it has to be pointed out. So the hypocrisy here from Elizabeth Warren only calling out Republicans for things that both parties are constantly engaging in is outrageous, and it does not do any services to the Democrats. All that it does is make people feel all the more disenfranchised and all the less likely to participate in electoral politics. And that is entirely the Democrats' fault. That is not, you do not blame someone for not liking their options. provide better options. Full stop. So anyhow, got a tweet here as well that's kind of along these same lines. This is from David Sirota, and we're not going to get too far into these details here, but Sirota says, here is Biden endorsing the pharma dem who gutted Biden's own drug pricing legislation. That's Kurt Schrader, conservative Democrat. He has been one of the people who opposes things that Biden rhetorically supports, like his Build Back Better bill, or certain provisions within his Build Back Better bill anyway. So while Biden cries, oh, I'm handcuffed, I can't do anything, he endorses the people who are handcuffing him. Do you guys see the game now? Does it make sense? We can't do anything because Congress won't let us. By the way, I'm going to endorse one of the guys that won't let us. But keep voting Democrats or else nothing's ever going to happen. But vote for the guy that's making sure nothing ever happens. So it's just more of this rotating villain bullshit, you guys. And it should not be fallen for. Biden endorsing him, Schrader in this case, it betrays his claims. He doesn't want this stuff to pass. He wants the excuse of Schrader and Manchin and Sinema. He wants to be able to say, no, not me. I support it. I'm your good old progressive Uncle Joe. It's their fault, right? But when you look into the details, turns out he's endorsing the people who are stopping him from doing what he rhetorically claims he wants to do. Again, just betrays the whole notion that Democrats are up to any sort of good. They are in their own way, and they are happy to remain in their own way. And another example of this in a slightly different way, you guys, is the Dianne Feinstein thing. I didn't bring up an article or anything here, but I'm sure a number of you saw. A number of other senators, I think it was 5 or 6 different senators, a number of her ex-staffers, a few different staffers have come forward and said, like, she is really not there anymore. People who know her well have had to reintroduce themselves numerous times in a single conversation. She forgets how she's vote. She has to have a staffer with her constantly because she forgets how she's supposed to vote. She went and spoke at a friend's memorial and forgot to mention the friend. Like, there a lot of stuff here, you guys, that's just like beyond the pale. She is no longer mentally there. And again, you guys, I don't take, like, Dianne Feinstein and I have all the disagreements in the world, but I don't take pleasure in watching her fall apart mentally. That's sad. It's terrible, especially to anybody who has watched it happen to a loved one. The reason I bring it up is that there was a progressive challenger to Dianne Feinstein this last time that she ran. What did the Democrats do? They bitched and moaned about it, and they defended and propped up Dianne. They get in their own way by choice, and then when they can't do anything, they say, look, such and such is in our way. Well, it's you. It's you. You know the Scooby-Doo meme where it's like, let's find out who the villain actually is. Democrats lifting that mask off, and it's like, oh, it's the Democrats. You know, they intentionally stand in their own way. They obstruct themselves, and then they use that obstruction as a defense for not doing anything when they have to run for election. And, you know, sad as it is to see a human being lose their mind, Feinstein is another example of that, where the party just reflexively defends a person who is not even competent anymore instead of considering a progressive challenger. So, you know, the dynamic within the Democratic Party is to obstruct progressives and play gatekeeper for the Republicans, and that dynamic is not going to serve them in November, but they will certainly not acknowledge that dynamic. They will instead point and blame the left, right? We all see this coming from a mile away. So with that, you guys, I will go ahead and call it a stream. Once again, want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org for all of our fantastic content, articles. I'm often interviewing our fantastic writers. We may have another one for you next week. You can find all of our podcasts there. Macro and Cheese with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine. You can find his show that he does a few times during the week, The Rogue Scholar. Jody Newell's The Up and Up, where she talks with activists and organizers. And you can find clips of my show on this YouTube channel as well, Real Progress in Action. Realprogressives.org for more info about us. Realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to help us out. Please like and subscribe. Please share widely. Leave a comment on this video to help us combat the algorithms. I also wanted to once again plug you guys the M for All basket. $10 donation gets you an entry into the raffle, $100 value on the basket, all sorts of treats and swag from the M for M for All group. They are putting on a week of action this July that's going to culminate with a march. So you'll be helping to pay for some of the organizing there. Make sure to get involved with them if you're interested. m4m4all.org/donate if you'd like to help out their cause and have a chance at winning this basket. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your viewership. That's something that I should say more. I'm honestly kind of humbled that as many of you tune in as do, and I really do appreciate it. I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic week. I will see you next Sunday at the usual time, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific.